The night was dense, a heavy silence wrapped the desert under a sky of infinite stars. There was something disturbing, almost forbidden, in the stories whispered around the ancient bonfires. Lilith's name was careful, as if just mentioning it could invoke her presence. She was not an uncommon woman, it never was. She was the spark of a conflict that nobody expected and that few understood. From the first Mesopotamian clay tablets to the dark texts of Jewish traditions, Lilith had always been more than a name. It was a warning, a promise and, for some, a cry drowned with freedom. Lilith was not born from dust as Adam, or from the rib like Eva. Lilith emerged with the same force and purpose as the first man. Equal to him in every sense, but different in spirit. In the shadows of Eden, while the creation flourished, she was the first to raise her voice and say no. But this was not an act of simple rebellion. It was an act of identity, of affirmation. A silent statement that rumbled over the centuries. In the ancient texts of Mesopotamia, Lilith had no human form. It was a nocturnal wind, a spirit that looked in the darkest hours. It was said that she stalked at night, looking for newborns and lonely men. In these stories, it was not a woman but a force, an original power that represented the unknown and the feared. The Sumerians called her Lilitu, and associated her with the desert, with the arid, with what cannot be tamed. But who really was this figure? Was it a demon or simply a creation of human fears? The Jews took this figure and gave him a face, a purpose, and a place in his worldview. According to the oldest traditions, Lilith was Adam's first wife, created at the same time as him and not later. In the early days of Eden, everything was new, everything was full of possibilities, but harmony did not last. When Adam tried to impose his will, Lilith rejected it. "I am the same," they say he said, and these words not only marked his destiny, but also his conviction. He left Eden for his own will, choosing exile on submission. It was then that the myth took a dark and heartbreaking turn. The Red Sea, vast and mysterious, became its shelter. There, between demons and shadows, Lilith found a new home, far from the divine rules. The angels were sent to bring her back, but she refused, even under threat of punishment. At that time, Lilith stopped being a woman. It became a symbol. It represented everything that could not be controlled, everything that challenged the norms, everything that society feared and wanted equal parts. But this challenge had a price. They condemned her to wander, to be the scourge of newborn children and the temptation of men. Loneliness became his company, rejection of his brand. Cabalistic tradition took her even further, linking her with Samhael, the angel of death. Together, they were the incarnation of the forbidden, a union that represented chaos in front of the divine order. But it was not always like that. Some say that Lilith cried in silence, longing for what he left behind. Others claim that he laughed in the dark, satisfied with his decision not to bend. Both versions have something really. Lilith's fascinating is how it evolved over time, adapting to each new culture and time. In Mesopotamia, it was a creature of the night, a wild spirit. In Judaism, it became an almost human figure, but loaded with symbolism. Over time, Lilith went from being feared to be admired, especially by those who saw in it a resistance figure, a rebellion against the structures imposed. But while their stories multiplied, a question persisted in the hearts of those who listened to it: what if Lilith was not the villain who told us? What would happen if your story were more than a story of condemnation and rebellion? What really meant being the first woman who refused to be controlled? In the dark of those ancient nights, while Lilith's story circulated among generations, something was clear: it wasn't just a myth. It was a reflection of the deepest fears, of the most uncomfortable questions, of the most repressed desires. And although the centuries have passed, the whisper of his name still has the power to stop breath. The history of Genesis is a story that has marked humanity, a narrative about the origin, about the beginning of everything. But in the shadows of this story, there is a figure that has been forgotten, suppressed, relegated to silence: Lilith. Its name does not appear in the official pages, but its essence is filtered between the lines. There, in the heart of creation, Lilith challenged the divine design by claiming what, according to her, it was his equality. Adam woke up from the dust of the earth, formed carefully, precisely. In his breath he carried the spark of life, but also the weight of loneliness. Then, according to an ancient and lost tradition, God created Lilith, a woman made of the same land as Adam. It was not a subordinate creature, it did not come from him, but it was his equal body and spirit. She shouldn't bow before him, nor him before her. They were two halves of a whole, created for the same purpose. At first, it seemed that everything was in balance. Two equal beings, destined to walk together in Eden. But equality does not always mean harmony. When Adam tried to impose his authority, something broke. Lilith was not as he expected. He was not docile, he was not submissive. He did not accept a role that placed it under him, neither in Eden nor anywhere else. Her pride, or perhaps her dignity, led her to pronounce words that would change her destiny forever: "I am not inferior to you. We were created the same." At that time, Eden ceased to be a paradise. The dispute between Lilith and Adam was not about love or passion, it was about power, about freedom. Adam wanted to dominate, and Lilith couldn't accept that. He decided to leave Eden, leave behind what others would consider perfect, to look for something beyond the borders of paradise. It was not an act of cowardice, but of courage. He chose exile before oppression. He chose loneliness before submission. Biblical Genesis, as we know it, keeps silent about this part of the story. Instead, introduce Eva, formed from Adam's rib, a being that, according to the texts, would be her ideal help. But Lilith was no longer there to witness this. He had left for an uncertain destination, carrying with him the burden of being the first to challenge not only a man, but to the divine order. Cabalistic tradition expands this story, filling the gaps that Genesis left. The ancient texts tell how Lilith, after leaving Eden, went to the shores of the Red Sea, a mysterious and dangerous place. There it became more than human. Without the protection of Eden, without the favor of God, Lilith was transformed. His name joined that of demons, to night spirits, to what men feared in the dark. However, the injustice of this narrative cannot be ignored. Lilith was not condemned for being evil, but for being free. His sin was not disobeying Adam, but refusing to be less than him. In his rejection of control, in his decision to leave, Lilith became a controversial figure, one that caused both fear and admiration. Genesis, with his emphasis on order and obedience, could not accommodate a woman like Lilith. It was too dangerous, too disruptive. But his absence in the official text did not eliminate its impact. Lilith persisted, hidden in the legends and alternative stories. It became a symbol for those who sought something beyond traditional narratives, for those who felt trapped by imposed roles. In spite of everything, Lilith was always there, a shadow in the story of Genesis. Its history forces us to look beyond what is written, to ask ourselves what other stories have been silenced. Because, in the end, Genesis is not only a creation story. It is also a story of elections, conflicts, of what is won and lost in the attempt to find a place in the world. And in that fight, Lilith will always be remembered as the first to say no. The relationship between Lilith and Adam began under the promise of equality. Both were molded from the same land, a creation that had to represent a perfect balance. But in practice, coexistence between them soon became a silent battlefield, where the differences between the expected and the real began to tear the illusion of harmony. It was then that Lilith's rebellion took shape, a rebellion that not only challenged Adam, but to the laws of Eden. The conflict arose from something apparently trivial, but that hid an abyss of inequality. Adam, according to the stories, tried to impose his authority on Lilith, demanding obedience, docility, and a subordinate role. But Lilith was not a creature willing to bow. Its essence was free, indomitable. Given Adam's demands, she replied with a simple but devastating statement: "We are the same. I will not kneel before you." These words, although simple, contained a force that resonated as a challenge to the divine order. Adam, accustomed to the idea of being the center of creation, could not accept Lilith's resistance. He tried to convince her, argue, and even beg, but Lilith did not yield. His refusal was firm, a wall against which Adam crashed again and again. And with each clash, the Eden seemed to tremble. The tension grew to become a breaking point. Lilith, tired of demands and control attempts, made a decision that would change his destiny forever. Instead of submitting, he chose to leave Eden. Leaving paradise was not just an act of courage, it was a declaration of independence, and claimed that he preferred exile rather than slavery. He did not ask permission, he did not explanations. He simply left. Lilith's act of leaving was not just a flight, it was a declaration of war against the power structures that tried to catch it. He pronounced a sacred name, one that, according to tradition, gave him wings and took it away from Eden. It was an act of challenge, a cry that reverberated in the confines of paradise, leaving Adam and its creator with a void they could not fill. In his departure, Lilith marked the beginning of a completely new narrative. It was no longer simply the first woman, it became the first rebel, the first to say no to a taxed destination. However, his decision was not without consequences. Adam, furious and humiliated, went to God, who sent 3 angels after Lilith to persuade her to return. But even in front of the threats of punishment, Lilith maintained her position. "I will not return," he said, "I can't return." This negative sealed its destiny. Lilith was convicted, not only to physical exile, but to a spiritual transformation. Tradition portrays it as a demonized figure, associated with the dark, with the forbidden. But this demonization does not erase the courage of his act. She was not evil, it was free. And that freedom, in a world designed for control, was unacceptable. Lilith did not submit, not because he couldn't, but because he didn't want to. His rebellion was an act of personal affirmation, a struggle to maintain his identity in a world that tried to mold it. And although his departure left a wound in Eden, he also left an indelible lesson: true equality cannot be imposed, it must be respected. But what happened next? What did Lilith with his newly won freedom? Did you find peace or just more conflicts? His story, far from finishing, just started. What awaited him beyond Eden was a destiny full of mystery, pain, and power. Lilith, the first to challenge the order, would continue to walk along the paths of the night, leaving behind a trail of questions and emotions that still resonate in the heart of those who listen to their name. Lilith fled. With every step that took far from Eden, the air seemed to become denser, heavier, but also freer. He didn't look back. Why would I do it? There was a paradise that was never his, a prison disguised as perfection. Now, her feet brought her to the unknown, towards exile, towards the Red Sea, a place full of shadows and secrets. In his chest there was no regret, only a mixture of pride and pain, a feeling of vacuum that slowly filled with something new, fury. The Red Sea was not a place of calm or comfort. Its waters seemed to beating with a dark energy, as if in their depths the echoes of lost souls were hidden. There, in that remote place, Lilith found refuge, but also a mirror of her own soul. I was alone, but it doesn't break. He had lost the Eden, but not his essence. However, loneliness was not his only company. Soon, 3 heavenly figures descended from the heavens. Angels, sent by God, floated on the waters of the Red Sea. His faces shone with a light that was both divine and intimidating. They were messengers, but also bearers of a mission: bring Lilith back, or punish her if she refused. His voices were serene, but firm, full of an authority that seemed to resonate with the weight of the universe. Lilith, daughter of the earth, the Creator calls you back. He returns to Eden and Adam, your partner, or faces the consequences of your disobedience. Lilith looked at them, without fear, although her heart was beating hard. He knew what his negative meant. He knew that disobeying not only Adam, but also to God, was to challenge the most sacred, the most untouchable. But she had already made her decision. His voice, firm like the rock, resonated in the air: I will not return. I was not created to submit. I prefer to face divine anger rather than give up my freedom. Lilith's words fell like thunder. The angels, surprised by their challenge, insisted. He was offered promises, they warned him about the punishment, but Lilith remained firm. Each refusal was like a blow against the structure of the established. His rebellion was not just against Adam, not even only against God, it was against a system that tried to deny her right to exist as herself. Los Angeles, finally, pronounced the verdict. If Lilith did not return to Eden, she would be cursed. It would be marked as a dangerous being, condemned to wander the world as a demonic creature. His children would be taken away, and his name would be associated for Siempre with chaos and darkness. But even before these words, Lilith did not flinch. "They can take everything away," he replied, "less my spirit." So, something changed. The waters of the Red Sea began to stir, as if they responded to the conflict. Lilith felt an energy that wrapped her, something that was not human or divine, but something intermediate, something that emanated from her own decision. His body, his essence, began to transform. He was no longer just a woman, now it was something else. A figure that did not belong to heaven or the earth. Her exile had made her a powerful, feared, and free entity. The angels observed solemnity. They had fulfilled their mission, but they had not managed to bend it. They retired, carrying with them the echo of the election of Lilith, an echo that would resonate in human stories as a whisper of challenge. In the Red Sea, Lilith stayed alone, but his loneliness was no longer a burden. It was a statement. There, between the stirred waters and the winds that blew as a choir in his honor, he began to understand that his transformation was not a curse, but a way of rebirth. He had lost the Eden, but had gained something much more valuable, his identity. But what would you do with this new power? Where would its indomitable spirit be taken? In the shadows of the Red Sea, while the waves rocked around, Lilith began planning her next play. Because, although I was alone, I was not defeated. His exile was not the end, but the beginning of something that no one, not even God, had planned. In the ancient texts of Sumeria and Babylon, the name of Lilith does not appear as a distant echo, but as a disturbing presence that slides between the shadows of the night. There, she is not Adam's first wife or a rebel figure, it is more dark, more feared. The Sumerians knew her as a nightly entity, a Thliltu, a demon that was around in the gloom, stalking the unsuspecting. His figure was both a myth and a warning, a creature that reflected the deepest fears of a society that sought order in a world full of chaos. Lilith, in these stories, was associated with the danger of the night, when the borders between the world of the living and that of the spirits became more diffuse. The Liltu was a disturbing female force, a presence that challenged established protection and security standards. Babylonian texts talked about her as a demon that meleized deserts and cities, looking for newborns to steal their breath, a symbolism that not only evoked fear of child death, but also terror to the unknown. In these ancient texts, Lilith was deeply connected with sexuality, independence, and destruction, attributes that, curiously, linked to divine figures such as Inanna and Ishtar, the goddesses of love, fertility, and war. The connection between Lilith and these goddesses was not accidental, they shared an essence that made them both powerful and feared. But while Inanna and Ishtar were revered as divinities, Lilith was relegated to the kingdom of the demonic, a contrast that revealed the constant struggle between the celebration and the condemnation of the feminine in ancient cultures. Inanna, the Sumerian goddess, was known for her intensity and contradictions. He was both a goddess of love and fertility and a relentless warrior. His descent to the underworld, one of the most famous stories of Sumerian mythology, resonated with echoes of Lilith. Both were figures that crossed limits, which challenged the barriers between life and death, between light and darkness. But while Inanna emerged triumphantly, Lilith was trapped in the shadows, condemned to be a reminder of what society could not accept. Ishtar, the Babylonian version of Inanna, shared similar characteristics. She was a goddess of passion, war, and fertility, but also a figure that could destroy as much as creating. In his anthem, he was praised by his strength and his power, but he was also feared for his ability to unleash chaos. Lilith, in many ways, was a shadow of Ishtar, a manifestation of its darkest aspects. But while Ishtar was celebrated in temples and rituals, Lilith became an enemy that should be exorcised, a figure that embodied the fears and anxieties that Ishtar could control, but that Lilith represented without restrictions. However, the similarities between Lilith, Inanna, and Ishtar cannot be ignored. All were female figures that challenged the norms, which represented both creation and destruction, both desire and fear. Lilith, like the Liltu, brought this duality to the extreme, being not only a threat, but also a reminder of the uncontrollable forces that inhabited the world. In Babylonian texts, amulets and enchantments were used to protect from Lilith. His name was pronounced with fear but also with a kind of fascination. It was seen as a force that should be contained, but also as a reflection of human contradictions, the desire for freedom against fear of chaos, the need for order against attraction for the forbidden. Lilith's connection with these goddesses and with the Sumerian and Babylonian stories reveals a deeper story, a narrative that talks about the struggle to understand and control the feminine. While the goddesses were worshipped and feared at the same time, Lilith became the dark mirror of what could not be domesticated. His figure, in the ancient texts, not only represents a demon, but also a force that defies the borders between the divine and the human, between the feared and the venerated. But how would this perception of Lilith evolve over time? Would it always be a feared figure, or would you find your place in narratives as more than a shadow of the goddesses? Lilith's story, like the Liltu, does not end in the Sumerian and Babylonian texts. It continues to transform, challenging, and leaving traces in every corner of human history. In Jewish mythology, Lilith occupies a dark and fascinating place, a figure that challenges both the norms and the deepest fears of humanity. Its name, mentioned in whispers and associated with the forbidden, takes a much more defined form in the alphabet of Ben Sira, a medieval text that, although it is not part of the sacred canon, leaves an indelible mark in the Jewish tradition. Here, Lilith is not only a shadow of ancient Mesopotamian traditions, it is a complete and complex figure, a mother of demons, a seductive who breaks the rules of the established order, and a rebel who refuses to submit. In Ben Sira's alphabet, Lilith is described as Adam's first wife, created not of his rib, but of the earth's same dust, just like him. This equality, which could have been a blessing, becomes the spark that unleashes the conflict. When Adam demands submission, Lilith refuses. He refuses to be inferior, to obey without questioning, to settle for a role that he does not recognize as his. Pronounce the ineffable name of God, an act of power and challenge, and flees to the Red Sea, leaving behind earthly paradise. But his escape does not free her from trial. God sends 3 angels to bring her back, offering him the opportunity to reconcile with his original role. However, Lilith, now in control of her destiny, refuses once more. It is at this point where his figure begins to transform into the Jewish tradition. Lilith becomes a symbol of what is indomitable, but also a reminder of the dangers of rebellion. The angels, unable to convince her, impose a punishment. Every day they will die of their children. Here emerges one of Lilith's most disturbing facets in Jewish mythology, Demon's mother. According to tradition, after his flight, Lilith joins with demons of the underworld, giving birth to an offspring that symbolizes chaos and transgression. These children, known as Lilim, are spirits that lurk the night, bearers of fear and misfortune. Lilith becomes the midwife of the dark, a distorted maternal figure that invests the ideal of fertility and protection. But Lilith is not only a mother, it is also a seductive. His independence and rebellion are intertwined with their power to attract and destroy. In the popular imaginary, he was attributed to the ability to appear in the dreams of men, seduce them and steal their vital strength. This aspect of Lilith is not only a moral warning against uncontrolled desires, but also an expression of the deepest fears of a patriarchal society towards autonomous female sexuality. Lilith, in this sense, represents what cannot be domesticated, which is both irresistible and dangerous. Amulets against Lilith became a common practice among the Jews of antiquity. In particular, protective amulets were placed in the cribs of the newborns, since it was believed that Lilith, in her role as the mother of demons, could steal young children or cause her death. His rebellion is not simply an act of disobedience, but an affirmation of his right to autonomy. In this context, Lilith is not just a demon, it is a symbol of resistance, of a woman's ability to claim her place in a world that tries to limit her. Ben Sira's alphabet is, in many senses, a turning point in the history of Lilith. Define central aspects of its character that would influence what it would be perceived in subsequent traditions. Mother of demons, seductive, rebel, Lilith is all these things and more. But this narrative does not end here. His figure continues to transform, sliding between the feared and the admired, between darkness and light. How would Lilith continue to evolve in collective imagination? Her story, like herself, refuses to be confined. Lilith's story would not be complete without the appearance of the three angels who pursue her, Sinai, Sansonoi, and Semenelov. These names resonate as symbols of divine authority, sent with a clear and forceful mission: bring Lilith back to Eden or impose eternal punishment for their disobedience. In this confrontation, the heavenly power and unwavering will of a figure that refuses to submit, which makes this episode into one of the most tense moments and loaded with symbolism of myth, are intertwined. After pronouncing the sacred name of God and abandoning Eden, Lilith finds refuge on the coast of the Red Sea, a place that is described in the myth as inhospitable, but also as a space of freedom. There, far from Adam's gaze and the rules imposed by the Creator, Lilith begins to transform his existence. However, his escape does not go unnoticed. Lilith's rebellion represents a challenge that cannot be ignored by the divine order. It is then that it is sent to the three angels, Sinai, Sansonoi, and Semenelov, figures of heavenly authority, whose task is to recover the lost balance. The arrival of Los Angeles to the Red Sea is wrapped in an atmosphere full of tension. His presence is not only the representation of the trial, but also of the conflict between two opposite wills. On the one hand, the angels, carriers of the divine mandate, are presented as justice figures, guardians of the cosmic order. On the other hand, Lilith, firm in their decision, faces them with the strength of their conviction. In this confrontation, there is no place for negotiation or nuances. It is the clash between duty and freedom, between heavenly power and individual autonomy. The three angels are not mere free emissaries. Each of them carries with it a name loaded with meaning. Sinai, Sansonoi, and Semenelov, although they do not appear in the canonical biblical texts, are figures that embody the strength and authority of the sacred. His mission is clear: to convince Lilith to return to Eden, reconcile with Adam, and assume the role assigned to him in creation. But Lilith, in her rebel essence, refuses. There is no plea or threat that can bend your will. Lilith's refusal not only ignites the angels of Los Angeles, but also leads them to impose implacable punishment. According to the myth, every day they will die of the children that Lilith conceives with the demons of the underworld, a conviction that symbolizes the destruction of his offspring and the perpetual loss of what could have been his lineage. This act not only reinforces the power of Los Angeles, but also establishes Lilith as a tragic figure, trapped in a cycle of pain and revenge. However, this episode also reveals the moral ambiguity that surrounds Los Angeles and his mission. Although they act in the name of divine justice, their punishment is severe, even cruel, suggesting that the heavenly order is not always synonymous with compassion. Angels become, in a certain sense, an instrument of a power that does not admit dissent, reinforcing the idea that freedom, although desired, has a high cost. In spite of everything, Lilith does not yield. His refusal to return to Eden and undergo Adam marks a point of no return in his history. The angels, unable to fulfill their mission, return to heaven, leaving behind a broken balance and a figure that, although punished, remains undefeated. It is here where Lilith's narrative acquires an almost heroic character, a resistance that makes it a symbol of independence and challenge. The names of Sinai, Sansonoi, and Semenelov were immortalized in the Jewish tradition as protectors against Lilith. It was believed that mentioning these names or enrolling them in amulets could protect newborns from the influence of Lilith, who, according to legends, sought revenge against human children for the loss of their own. These amulets, which were placed in the cribs of babies, not only served as protection talismans, but also as reminders of the eternal struggle between order and rebellion, between divine authority and individual will. The history of the three angels and their confrontation with Lilith is more than a mythological episode. It is a reflection on the limits of power, the nature of punishment and resistance to the inevitable. And, although Los Angeles see they use their role in the narrative, Lilith remains the center of attention, a figure that, even in its exile and suffering, manages to challenge the forces that seek to bend it. But its story does not end here. The shadow of Los Angeles will follow it, as well as its struggle to maintain its autonomy in a world that tries to define it. The figure of Lilith, wrapped in mystery and controversy, evolves over the centuries to become more than a rebel woman or a demon mother. In medieval mythology, an even darker and seductive role is attributed to him, the mother of the succubes, those female demons who visited men in their dreams, feeding on their desires and sowing chaos in the world of the living. This association between Lilith and the succubes not only reinforces its image as a transgressive being, but also underlines the complex relationship between power, desire, and the forbidden. The stories that link Lilith with the succubes describe her as her parent and queen, a central figure in the underworld who guides these entities in her mission of seduction and destruction. According to legends, succubes were women of irresistible beauty, capable of attracting even the most virtuous man. They appeared in dreams, when the defenses of the mind crumbled, and turned those moments of vulnerability into a bridge towards the forbidden. These meetings were not simply sensual. It was said that the succubes stole the vital energy of their victims, physically and spiritually weakening them. In the center of this narrative is Lilith, seen as the archetype of the succubus, the first to challenge the norms and claim their autonomy. Her initial rebellion, which led her to leave Eden, now translates into a dark power that she uses to control and dominate. But beyond the evil attributed to him, Lilith remains a symbol of desire, independence, and the rejection of being defined by others. This ambivalence between victim and villain, between mother and seductive, feeds the multiple interpretations of his myth. The link between Lilith and Orcubos also has a strong connection with the fears and obsessions of the medieval era. In a deeply religious society, where female sexuality was seen as dangerous and uncontrolled, the succubes became a convenient explanation for erotic dreams and males' weaknesses. In this context, Lilith not only embodied the threat of uncontrolled desire, but also that of female power that escaped the control of patriarchal society. In medieval traditions, it was believed that the succubes did not act solely for pleasure or evil, but had a darker purpose. According to some legends, they collected the seed of the men with whom they used to create new demons, strengthening the ranks of the underworld. This narrative reinforces the image of Lilith as a mother and creator, although in a perverted and demonic sense. Through her children, Lilith continues to challenge the divine order, consolidating as a resistance and transformation figure. The stories about the succubes not only describe their actions, but also the consequences of their encounters. The men who were visited by these entities woke up exhausted, with a feeling of vacuum that went beyond physical fatigue. Some stories talk about mysterious diseases, loss of strength and, in extreme cases, death. For the mentality of the time, these stories not only justified inexplicable phenomena, but also served as warnings against the dangers of unofficial desire. Despite the condemnation that accompanies these figures, the succubes also represent a form of release, although twisted, for the women of the time. In a world where female autonomy was almost non-existent, Lilith's stories and his daughters offered an alternative, although dark, to the passive role that was expected of them. In this sense, Lilith is not only the mother of the succubes, but also a symbol of the struggle for freedom in an oppressive environment. Lilith's relationship with succubes also has spiritual implications. In the Cabalistic tradition, the succubes, and by Lilith extension, represent the break with the divine balance. They are manifestations of fragmentation and chaos that occur when human will deviates from its original purpose. However, this same tradition also recognizes in Lilith a spark of divinity, a reminder that even in the dark, there can be a flash of light and meaning. The myth of Lilith as the mother of the succubes is, ultimately, an exploration of the limits between good and evil, between obedience and rebellion, between the divine and the earthly. In his figure, elements of horror and fascination, rejection and attraction, condemnation and admiration are combined. And although the stories that surround it they are full of darkness, there are also a strange beauty, a celebration of the complexity and ambiguity of human nature. But Lilith is not simply a demonic mother or a queen of the underworld. In its connection with the succubes, something deeper is revealed, a reminder of the uncontrollable forces that inhabit all of us, of the desires and fears that mold our existence. And while Lilith's shadows and her daughters extend for men's dreams, her myth is still alive, challenging our perception of what she means being human. In the mystical tradition of Judaism, the figure of Lilith acquires even greater complexity, merging with the darkest and most mysterious forces of the universe. Kabbalah, an esoteric and deeply symbolic system, offers a vision of Lilith that goes beyond the simple seductive and mother of demons. In this context, she presents itself as a central figure in the cosmic balance, a being that represents both disobedience and primary darkness, a force that moves in the shadows of the divine. In Kabbalah, Lilith is more than a woman who rebels against Adam. It is seen as a being that belongs to the world of chaotic forces, placing itself on the dark side of creation. Its origin is described as an entity that arises from the same primordial vacuum that precedes the cosmic order, a void that, according to Cabalistic tradition, is necessary for the existence of the universe. Lilith is the reflection of this desolation, the energy that is beyond light, the beginning and the end, the force that opposes the creation itself. The relationship between Lilith and Samhael, the angel of death, is essential to understand their role in the Cabal. Samhael, known for being the angel who embodies destruction and chaos, is not simply a malevolent figure in the Cabalistic tradition. It is, in many ways, a manifestation of divine justice, an angel who, despite his association with death, also participates in the process of transformation and purification. Samhael is not only the executor of the divine will, but also the one who prepares souls for ascension or descent, depending on the path they have chosen. Lilith and Samhael, in Cabalistic vision, form a dark couple, a duality that reflects the interaction between life and death, light and darkness. Its relationship is more complex than a simple alliance between a demon and a fallen angel. It is a link between opposite forces that complement each other and balance each other. In some versions of tradition, it is said that Lilith and Samhael were once lovers, united in their rebellion against the divine order, and that together they engender the demons and dark spirits that lurk humanity. This symbolic union reflects the ability of darkness to generate life, but a life that is marked by suffering and transgression. In this context, Lilith is seen as a shadow of the Shekinah, a contrast that reflects the dark part of divinity. While Shekinah represents divine mercy and compassion, Lilith embodies rabbis, revenge and punishment. In this way, Lilith becomes a force that interrupts the flow of divine energy, causing the fall of souls towards darkness. However, this fall is necessarily seen as a final destination, but as a part of the cosmic cycle of ascent and descent that governs the universe. Samhael, meanwhile, plays a complementary role, that of Lilith. He is often described as an angel who guides lost souls, not towards eternal conviction, but towards his transformation. Samhael is the angel of death, but also that of regeneration. Through his relationship with Lilith, Samhael not only represents physical destruction, but also the death of selfishness, fears, and illusions, allowing souls to evolve on their spiritual journey. In some Cabalistic traditions, Lilith and Samhael are described as two forces that need each other to complete their function in the universe. Although they represent different aspects of existence, their interaction is essential for the manifestation of reality. Lilith, with her rebellion and her shadow, cannot exist without the light of Samhael, who gives her shape and purpose. On the other hand, Samhael cannot play his role as the angel of death without the presence of Lilith, which offers the darkness and transgression necessary for spiritual transformation. The myth of Lilith and Samhael is also related to the Cabalistic idea of the Sephro, the 10 divine emanations that make up the Tree of Life. Each of these Sephro represents an aspect of divinity, from wisdom and understanding to mercy and beauty. Lilith, in his relationship with Samhael, is seen as a manifestation of the Sephira of Gevura, the force of severity, which balances the Hesed, mercy. Together, Lilith and Samhael balance the forces of the universe, ensuring that chaos and creation are in constant flow and transformation. In the Kabbalah, it is said that Lilith, when expelled from Eden and associated with Samhael, acquires the power to seduce men, but not only to satisfy their desire, but to tempt them towards a spiritual transformation. She is not simply a figure of evil, but an entity that has the power to challenge, question and reconfigure existing structures. In his relationship with Samhael, Lilith becomes the guardian of the boundaries between the divine and the human, the mortal and the immortal, acting as a reminder that existence is not static, but a constant process of change and evolution. Thus, the figure of Lilith in the Kabbalah is enriched with new meanings, becoming not only the mother of demons or night seductive, but in a primary force that, despite its apparent darkness, is crucial for the cosmic balance. His relationship with Samhael not only reveals the darkest aspects of the universe, but also the possibility of redemption through the acceptance of the forbidden and the transgressive. In the Cabalistic tradition, the connection between Lilith and Samhael is interpreted as a deeply symbolic union, one that reflects the opposite and complementary forces that shape the cosmos. The relationship between the two is not simply a love and seduction story, but a transcendental act that touches the fibers of the balance between light and darkness. Its link is the manifestation of a primary principle, the coexistence of contradictory forces that, although apparently incompatible, are necessary for creation to continue its course. Samhael, the angel of death, and Lilith, the woman who challenged God, are the incarnations of severity and transgression. In the Cabal, evil is not seen as an external force that must be eliminated, but as an energy that must be understood and assimilated. Evil, in this context, is an essential component of the cosmic process, and Samhael and Lilith represent the dark forces that allow the life and death cycle, creation and destruction, advance. The union of Samhael and Lilith is, in this sense, a prohibited relationship, but not for that reason. It is an alliance that defies the divine norms, but it is also part of the divine tissue. In Cabalistic texts, especially in Zohar, one of the most important books of Jewish mysticism, are deep interpretations about the union between Samhael and Lilith. In the Zohar, it is explained that Lilith and Samhael are the manifestations of two different aspects of the Gevurah, severity, one of the Sephirot that refers to discipline and judgment. The Gevurah is necessary to balance the Chesed, mercy, and, therefore, creation and destruction must exist in a constant dynamic of opposite forces. This opposite interaction is what drives the evolution of the universe, and Lilith and Samhael play a crucial role in this process. The Zohar describes Lilith as a transgression figure, not only because he challenged Adam's authority, but because he embodies the force that opposes the divine order. However, this transgression is not seen as an evil action in itself, but as a way of freeing the repressed energies that are part of the creation. Lilith, as the mother of demons, represents the expression of the repressed and the forbidden, a force that allows the cosmic forces of change and transformation to arise. In this sense, Lilith is not only a rebel, but a figure that embodies the power of liberation and rupture of established structures. Samhael, meanwhile, in the Zohar, is described as the angel who acts in the name of God, but from the perspective of the Gevurah. Although it is associated with death and destruction, Samhael is also considered a necessary force for purification and rebirth. In her relationship with Lilith, Samhael not only fulfills her role as angel of death, but becomes the perfect partner for her in her role of destructive force. Together, they represent the polarity that is essential for existence. The destruction that Samhael brings is not an eternal condemnation, but a process that prepares the land for a spiritual renewal, and Lilith, with its ability to challenge the established order, facilitates that renewal through its transgression. The symbolic connection between Lilith and Samhael also reflects the duality present in the very nature of humanity. Cabalists believe that every human being carries within both the forces of light and those of darkness, and this internal struggle is what drives spiritual growth. The relationship between Samhael and Lilith, although apparently dark and prohibited, symbolizes that struggle within each human being. It is a reminder that evil and darkness are not forces that must be feared or rejected, but aspects of reality that must be understood and reconciled. Zohar also highlights Lilith's role as a figure that has power over dreams and seduction. It is said that she has the ability to enter the dreams of men and generate demons with them. This Lilith's ability to influence the world of dreams reflects her ambiguous nature. She is both a tempting and a force that can trigger spiritual transformation. In the Zohar, it is explained that dreams are a form of contact between the material and the spiritual world, and that Lilith, with its connection with Samhael, has the ability to destabilize this contact to reorient souls towards a darker destination or towards a necessary purification. Lilith's figure is also connected to the Cabalistic concept of tikkun, or the repair of the world. Despite its appearance of transgressive and malignant, Lilith plays a role in repairing the universe by challenging divine structures and allowing chaos to manifest. In this vision, chaos is not something negative, but a space where limitations can be broken and allow new forms of existence to arise. Samhael, in his destructive role, is also necessary for this repair process, since death is a form of cleanliness that gives way to regeneration. The Zohar, in its deepest teachings, shows how the union of Samhael and Lilith is one of the manifestations of the cosmic process of creation, destruction, and regeneration. This relationship, although prohibited in appearance, is nothing more than an expression of the need for balance between the forces of good and evil, light and darkness. In the Cabalistic world, these forces are not opposite in the sense of being exclusive, but are interrelated and necessary for the existence itself. Through this union, Lilith and Samhael teach us that darkness, far from being a separate and destructive force, is an integral part of the life cycle. The struggle between good and evil, between what is allowed and the forbidden, is what allows the world to continue its course, constantly transforming. In their union, Lilith and Samhael not only represent chaos, but also the potential of renewal, the transgression that allows evolution, and death that gives way to life. In the vast and mysterious fabric of mystical and religious traditions, Lilith appears as a complex figure, whose role transcends the simple categories of demon or victim. His relationship with fallen angels, those who rebelled against the divine order, invites us to explore the depths of the heavenly conflict and how a figure like her is intertwined with other mythological entities that challenge God's will. Lilith not only shares the same essence of transgression with these fallen angels, but their rebellion has echoes of other mythical stories, such as Lucifer and Nephilim, which mark the end of a perfect divine order and the beginning of a new era of darkness and chaos. The Heavenly Rebellion, that primary event in which Los Angeles, led by Lucifer, challenged God, is one of the most powerful stories of the Judeo-Christian tradition. In this context, Lucifer stands as the leader of the fallen angels, those who, unable to submit to the divine authority, were expelled from heaven and sentenced to wander over the dark. The same rebel impulse, that need to question the divine order and seek an independent existence, is present in Lilith. The figure of Lilith, although less known than Lucifer, has a parallel story in which he also challenges God's mandate, choosing, like Lucifer, to follow his own path. His refusal to submit to Adam, his rejection of being a secondary creation, and his decision to flee to the Red Sea to escape from divine tyranny place it, symbolically, along with the fallen angels. Lilith's story as Adam's first wife is a reflection of discord that can arise in any attempt to master the freedom of being. While Adam was created from the dust of the earth, Lilith was the same mud as him, an egalitarian creation, which granted him, in his vision, the same rights and duties. Lilith's refusal to undergo Adam, to accept a relationship in which he dominated her, was the act of rebellion that led her to flee from Eden, facing the will of God and the divine designs. Like Lucifer, who challenged God for his pride and his desire for freedom, Lilith disagreed the divine order of subjugating Adam and rebelled against the established celestial order. Lilith's rebellion can also be compared on that of the Nephilim, the descendants of the angels who took human women as wives, as narrated in the Book of Enoch. These beings, known as giants, are the result of an even more explicit transgression, the mixture of the heavenly with the earthly, the divine with the human. The Nephilim, like Lilith, challenged the borders between the divine and the human, altering the natural order of things. While the Nephilim were punished for their actions, Lilith, like the fallen angels, found a way of subverting the punishment, becoming a powerful figure in the hidden world. Both represent a challenge to the natural order and a break with what is expected of heavenly or earthly creatures. The power of the Nephilim and the influence of Lilith are in their ability to transcend the borders imposed by the Creator, looking for a path that allows them to exist in an intermediate place, between heaven and earth, between the divine and the human. Over the centuries, Lilith's stories have intertwined those of the fallen angels, creating a figure that is not only a symbol of rebellion, but also of autonomy against oppression. In some Cabalistic interpretations, Lilith is associated with Samhael, the angel of death, who also shares a nature of transgression and separation. Together, they represent a link between the forbidden and the necessary, a relationship that allows the balance between light and darkness, life and death. In these texts, Lilith is not simply a rebel, but a cosmic entity that challenges the order to give way to the creation of new possibilities, as well as the fallen angels who, when rebelled, brought both the chaos and the potential for transformation and like Lucifer, who, when expelled from the sky, became the prince of hell, Lilith, fleeing from Eden, became a figure that lives the margins of morality and divinity. His union with Samhael, his relationship with the demons and his role as the mother of the succubes are the echoes of a rebellion that has never been completely understood, but that persists as an essential part of the human myth. Lilith not only represents transgression, but also freedom of choice, the right to decide on their destiny, a power that fallen angels also claimed in their own heavenly rebellion. The figure of Lilith, when it is placed in the context of the fallen angels and the Nephilim, becomes a symbol of the eternal struggle between obedience and freedom, between the divine order and the rebellion. His story, such as Lucifer and the fallen angels, reminds us that the desire for independence and autonomy is a powerful force that can even challenge the divine mandate, but that, in turn, has a price. The price of the rebellion is the condemnation of exile, to isolation, but also the creation of a new space, a place where the limits between the divine and the profane, between the sky and the earth, are blurred and allow the emergence of new realities. Lilith, in many of the mystical and religious traditions, is described not only as a rebel figure, but also as a force that is associated with the depths of the underworld. Like Lucifer, who became the leader of hell after his fall from heaven, Lilith takes a leading role in the dark and prohibited spheres of the beyond. But his role in hell is not only that of a mere inhabitant or victim of his conviction, but that of a queen, a powerful leader who governs from the shadows, with the same strength and determination with which he challenged God and Adam. In the world of occultism and Cabal, Lilith is often seen as the queen of hell, not in the sense of being Satan's wife, but in a much deeper and more autonomous sense. She is not simply a subordinate in the kingdom of evil, but has her own domain, a place where she is the undisputed sovereign. It is as if, when expelled from Eden, Lilith had claimed her place in the depths of hell, which becomes a refuge for those who, like her, do not fit in the divine order. Here, in the underworld, Lilith is both a leader and a figure that symbolizes liberation through transgression. Throughout the legends and esoteric texts, Lilith is seen as the figure that leads the condemned souls and the creatures of the abyss, those who live outside of the celestial domain. In some stories, she becomes the mother of demons and, more specifically, of the succubes, creatures that feed on the vital energy of men, bringing with them the darkness and decay. Lilith, therefore, is not only a queen, but also a mother, a protective figure of those that exist on the margins, far from light and the divine order. His link with Samhael, the angel of death, it reinforces his role as the sovereign of the underworld. Samhael, who in many myths is associated with death and destruction, becomes his partner and ally in the kingdom of shadows. Together, they govern the lost souls, on the beings that have crossed the line of transgression, and now they must pay the price of their actions. In this kingdom, Lilith is a figure of absolute power, a force of nature that has transformed its exile into its own domain. In this context, hell is not only a place of punishment, but also a space for transformation. Lilith, having been banished from Eden, is not a victim of her fall, but a figure that has found power in her pain. As Queen of Hell, she does not see herself as a defeated being, but as a leader who has managed to forge her own destiny in a dark world. His transformation of a simple exiled woman to an infernal queen is a representation of the power that can arise from rebellion and resistance. In addition, Lilith is a symbol of free will, the ability to decide on his own destiny, although that decision means embracing the darkness. She chooses her place in hell, and instead of undergoing the divine will, as expected of her, she becomes an autonomous force, capable of influencing and shaping the world around her. This power over the underworld is reflected in the relationship it maintains with other infernal and demonic creatures, who are loyal not because they fear it, but because they respect it as a powerful figure that never surrendered. Through the centuries, the figure of Lilith as Queen of Hell has endured as a symbol of rebellion and strength. She is not simply a figure that lives the shadows, she is the shadow itself. In his kingdom, pain and suffering are not the end, but the beginning of a new existence, where suffering becomes power. Lilith, as a leader in hell, is not a simple spectator of chaos, but a creator of that chaos, a woman who has taken her destiny in her own hands, transforming what was given to a kingdom of darkness and power. In many stories, it is said that Lilith has the ability to influence humans from their position in hell. Through their demonic children, succubes, and other infernal beings, Lilith can sow discord, seduce and manipulate men to deviate from the divine path. This ability to manipulate and control humans reinforces their image as a queen, a sovereign who not only governs in the underworld, but has the ability to extend their influence through the borders between the worlds. She is the mother of shadows, the lady of demons, a figure whose presence feels both in hell and in the human world. Lilith, then, is not just a condemnation figure, but also of power, a force that shows that, even in the dark, there are those who get up and become kings and queens. In his kingdom, Lilith not only survives, she thrives. She governs with a mixture of cunning, courage and a deep understanding of what it means to be beyond the reach of divine grace. In Hell, far from being a victim, Lilith becomes an empowerment figure, a queen whose power feeds on her rejection of the celestial order. Lilith has been interpreted in various ways throughout history, but perhaps one of the most powerful and relevant readings in modern times is that which presents it as a symbol of female independence. Throughout the centuries, its history has been the subject of different readings that have linked it to liberation and self-determination issues. His figure has been reinterpreted by many feminist movements as an icon of resistance against patriarchy, the struggle for autonomy and the right to decide on his own destiny. When Lilith rebels against Adam and the order established in Eden, does not do so by evil, but for a deep sense of justice and autonomy. His refusal to submit to Adam, by refusing to be his subordinated and accept his role in the divine order, places it in a position of conflict with the power structure that the patriarchal society had arranged for her. By rejecting submission, Lilith represents a figure that defies the norms and expects respect, equality, and freedom to be the foundations of any relationship. In this sense, his rejection of being subjugated by Adam is not only an act of disobedience, but an act of affirmation of his own being, his identity, and his right to be treated with equality. In an era where women were, for the most part, seen as men dependent on men, Lilith presents itself as a character that chooses their own path, even if that implies being banished from Eden. In this context, the independence of Lilith is interpreted as an act of courage, an act that, although it begins lightly painful, it finally allows you to forge your own existence. Upon leaving Eden, he does not look like a banished victim, but as a woman who has taken the reins of her life, who refuses to undergo the expectations of society and heaven. Instead of being rejected, she finds a new freedom in her exile, and does so without regretting her decisions. This independence is not only a reaction against the norms imposed by patriarchy, but also a celebration of female autonomy in its purest form. Lilith not only challenges Adam, but also God himself, by refusing to accept a subordinate role and live under the rules that he does not consider fair. At a time when the woman was seen mainly as a maid, mother, and wife, Lilith presents himself as the woman who refuses to be defined by those roles. His rebellion is the act of a woman who claims her right to decide, to own her life and not to be seen as an object or an accessory in the life of another being. In addition, Lilith becomes an emblem of female sexual freedom. His role as the mother of demons and his association with succubes have sometimes been interpreted as a representation of female sexuality without restrictions. Instead of being seen as a woman who must suppress her desire or undergo social expectations in sexuality, Lilith is a figure that takes control over her own body and her own sexuality. The patriarchal tradition, often obsessed with the chastity and submission of women, finds in Lilith a symbol of the woman who seizes her desire, hugs him and does not feel ashamed of it. In his case, sexuality is not something that must be repressed, but something that must be claimed and fully lived. Lilith also represents sorority, solidarity among women. Throughout traditions, it is said that Lilith is associated with other women who have been victims of oppression and abuse, including women who have been abandoned, mistreated or marginalized. In many stories, Lilith becomes a figure that protects other women, helping them to find their inner strength and resist male oppression. Through their struggle, Lilith teaches women not to settle for social expectations, but to fight for their independence and for their right to be who they really are. His figure becomes a reference for all those who have felt trapped in a life of submission, oppression, and inequality. Modern feminists have embraced Lilith as a symbol of emancipation, a model for those women who seek to free themselves from the chains of patriarchy and oppression. Its history is a reminder that the struggle for equality should not only occur in the social and political level, but also in the spiritual and personal level. Lilith is a woman who refuses to be dominated, who refuses to be silenced, who refuses to be subjected. Its history invites us to question the rules imposed, to challenge the expectations that society has about women and fight for a life that is in harmony with our own needs, desires, and aspirations. Lilith's myth, then, is not just an ancient story, it is a timeless lesson on the importance of autonomy, resistance, and empowerment. When putting the figure of Lilith in the fore, women can find a source of inspiration and strength in their ability to own their destiny, in their right to reject what is imposed on them, and in their courage to create their own paths. Lilith, the first woman who rebelled, is still a resistance figure, a reminder that women have always had the power to take the reins of their lives. Lilith and Eva, two central figures in the Judeo-Christian tradition, are often seen as the opposite poles of femininity. While Eva has been interpreted as the model of submissive women, the mother and wife, Lilith represents a rebel, independent and challenging femininity. The stories of these two figures, although both come from the same biblical story, offer a deeply contrasting vision of what it means to be a woman. Eva, according to the biblical narration in Genesis, was created from Adam's rib to be her partner and proper help. From the beginning of its existence, its role is presented as that of a subordinate, a woman destined to complement her husband. Eva is the mother of all humanity, the mother who gives life, but her creation from Adam's rib highlights her unequal relationship with him, a reminder that, in the Judeo-Christian tradition, the woman was seen as secondary to the man. Eva, therefore, represents the ideal of traditional femininity, a passive, obedient figure, whose existence is intertwined with that of her husband. On the other hand, Lilith, the first wife of Adam according to older Jewish legends, offers a radically different interpretation of women. Lilith was not created from Adam's rib, but, according to earlier traditions, was made of the same land as him, which makes it its equal. This initial equality is essential to understand Lilith's rebellion. She does not submit to Adam, but demands to be treated with respect and dignity, something she does not find in her partner. When refusing to be subjugated, Lilith becomes the symbol of female autonomy and freedom, challenging the norms imposed by patriarchy. His rejection to submit is not only a rejection of Adam, but an affirmation of his right to be seen and treated as the same, without the need to depend on a man to validate his existence. The figure of Lilith becomes, then, a symbol of radically different femininity from Eva's. While Eva is seen as the woman who succumbed to temptation, the mother of original sin, Lilith is presented as the woman who defies the divine rules and goes into exile to forge her own destiny. Instead of being seen as the mother of humanity, Lilith is considered the mother of demons, a figure associated with chaos, rebellion, and sexuality without restrictions. Its history is marked by the struggle, resistance, and self-definition, while Eva, in many stories, is defined by her relationship with Adam and her role in the fall of man. This dichotomy between Eva and Lilith offers a dual representation of femininity: on the one hand, the woman who accepts and fulfills her traditional role within the patriarchal society, and on the other, the woman who challenges expectations and seeks her own path, even at the expense of punishment and condemnation. Eva is the woman who, succumbing to sin, becomes the vehicle of redemption, the mother who generates humanity, while Lilith is the woman who never submits and, therefore, is punished, banished and associated with the dark forces. Eva is seen as the goody in the Judeo-Christian tradition, the woman who follows the straight path, while Lilith is demonized, a figure from which you must fear and move away. However, in recent times, many feminist movements have begun to see Lilith as an alternative model, a woman who fights for her autonomy and freedom, and who refuses to be defined by men. In contrast to the image of Eva as the sacrificed mother and the submissive wife, Lilith represents the woman who refuses to be the victim of the social norms imposed. Lilith's story is not only a story of rebellion, but also of empowerment. She is the woman who takes control over her destiny, who faces the gods and men, and who, in her exile, becomes a powerful figure. In this contrast between Eva and Lilith, two versions of the female ideal are reflected. On the one hand, we have the femininity that fits traditional expectations, the woman who serves, who is a mother and wife, who fulfills her role without questioning it. On the other hand, we have the femininity that challenges those expectations, which refuses to be limited by predefined roles and dare to walk a different path, although that means being rejected and condemned. This contrast highlights the tensions inherent to the female figure in mythology and in society, the struggle between being a woman who fulfills her destiny or a woman who redefines him. While Eva has been venerated as the symbol of motherhood, fertility, and salvation, Lilith has been condemned as the demonic woman, which represents darkness, sin, and chaos. However, when looking at them from a modern perspective, both figures can be understood as representations of the internal struggle that many women face, the tension between fulfilling social expectations and challenging those expectations in search of a more authentic identity. In this sense, both Eva and Lilith offer complementary and conflicting visions of what it means to be a woman, and both are part of a broader narrative about the role of women in history and in society. His figure is as captivating as dangerous, a presence that arouses admiration, desire, and fear at the same time. Lilith is not just a woman, it's a symbol. A symbol of power, freedom and, at the same time, of mortal seduction. The one that is said was Adam's first wife, before Eva, is an incomparable beauty creature, but whose charm is not exempt from dark and dangerous nuances. The stories that survive of her speak of a woman who is not only beautiful, but also has a beauty that disarms all those who cross on her way. Lilith's description as a seduction figure is never casual. Its beauty is one of its most lethal weapons, something that not only attracts, but consumes. It is the kind of beauty that transcends the physical which enchants minds and poisons hearts. It is said that Lilith has soft skin such as silk, dark and deep eyes that invite themselves to get lost in them, and a body that, according to myths, can cause the most voracious desire. But this beauty is not a blessing, it is a curse that condemns those who fall into their trap. Every look he throws, every smile he draws on his lips, has the power to wrap the observer in a fatal hug. It is the woman who disarms the strongest, which, with a single word, can catch the most resolved man. But its power does not lie only in its appearance, but also in its intelligence and cunning. Lilith is a woman who knows what she wants and takes it without hesitation. He does not know the fear, nor the rules that society imposes on women. In his rebellion against Adam and the established order, Lilith demonstrates absolute independence, and that, in itself, makes it a more seductive figure yet. The stories about Lilith present it as a supernatural seductive, capable of making men lose control over themselves. And in the medieval tradition, many associated it with dreams and night temptation, because, as it was said, I visited men while they slept, taking the shape of a beautiful and seductive woman. On those dark nights, Lilith not only dragged men to their beds, but subdued them to their will, leaving them thorough and empty at dawn. The one that sought pleasure without regrets, which stripped men of their vital energy, became a symbol of the most dangerous temptation. Not only seduced, but damaged, the deepest of his being disappeared. His relationship with seduction is both physical and emotional. Lilith is not simply a woman who attracts, but a woman who transforms, who marks. Those who succumb to her did not only do it for a momentary desire, but because they were trapped in their possession, dominated by a force of attraction so imposing that they lost their own identity. It is said that Lilith represents sexuality without restrictions, a force that slides between shadows and knows no limits. It is a powerful, transformative sexuality, which does not conform to morality or social expectations. Those who approach it, either out of curiosity or by desire, are wrapped in a spiral of obsession, and often of destruction. It is important to note that Lilith's seduction is not just physical. Its charm is more than a beautiful body. It is your mind, your rebel spirit, that really spell. Lilith is not willing to undergo or be dominated, and this autonomy is an irresistible attraction for those who meet her. She is the woman who does not need anyone to exist, his power lies in his independence. And that, for many, is the most attractive of everything. In the texts that describe it, Lilith appears as a woman who dares to live according to her own terms, regardless of what society or the gods can think. This attitude of challenge towards the norms and expectations of others makes their seduction even more dangerous. Lilith not only attracts for her beauty, but also for her courage, her ability to do what others do not dare. In this sense, Lilith's seduction becomes something that is not only a matter of desire, but of power. Her attraction is the result of her autonomy, of her courage to be herself, regardless of the consequences. And it is that Lilith, more than a simple mythological figure, is a deep symbol of the struggle for control over their own destiny. Its beauty, their power of seduction, are just a reflection of their internal struggle, a struggle to be free, not to depend on anyone or anything. Those who succumb to her, somehow, do it because they recognize in it a force that challenges conventions, a force that, although dangerous, is also irresistible. This dangerous charm, this beauty loaded with power, is what makes Lilith remain so present in culture and mythology over the centuries. Over time, he has become a demonic woman to become a symbolic figure of independence, strength, and seduction without restrictions. Lilith is not just a woman who attracts, but a woman who conquers, who challenges, and finally becomes the owner of her own destiny. As the Middle Ages advanced, Lilith's myth became a dark symbol, wrapped in mystery, fear, and fascination. His figure began to be represented in many ways, always with a halo of danger that not only associated it with seduction, but also with witchcraft, evil, and corruption. During this time, art and literature played a crucial role in the way Lilith was perceived, feeding legends and expanding its notoriety in collective imagination. In the painting, Lilith was often represented as a woman I have rose, but with details that indicated their sinister nature. The medieval artists, influenced by the religious writings and the demonization of the female figure, painted Lilith as a monstrous figure that embodied all the vices and temptations that the medieval societies feared. Her figure was a reflection of the duality that characterized her, exterior beauty combined with an internal threat, with the suggestion that her beauty was only the mask that hid her demonic nature. The representations used to show it with long dark hair, penetrating eyes, and a posture that transmitted an arrogant independence. The concept of women as tempting, demonic, and destructive, present in the Bible, charged more strength in the Middle Ages through Lilith's images. This visual representation of Lilith as the seductive figure, but dangerous, was not only a warning against carnal desire, but also against the danger represented by a woman who challenged the established order. With his eyes of fire, his challenging attitude, and his insurmountable beauty, Lilith was the emblem of sin and rupture with religious morals. In medieval literature, his presence remained equally disturbing. In the Ben Sira alphabet, written in the 10th century, Lilith appears as Adam's first wife, a woman who, with her indomitable spirit, refused to submit to him. This story entered Lilith's psychology as a woman who rebelled against the male figure, rejecting the submission that the biblical tradition attributed to women. Lilith's myth, therefore, was inserted into a medieval narrative that saw disobedient women as chaos agents and destruction. In addition to his representation as a rebel wife, Lilith became a figure associated with witchcraft and demons. In many medieval legends, it was linked to the succubes, nocturnal creatures that visited men while sleeping, tearing their vital strength in acts of seduction. This concept of Lilith, like a being that stalked in the dark, fed medieval fears towards the unknown and the supernatural. The women who departed from the norm, who challenged the submission imposed, were easily labeled as witches. Therefore, Lilith became an archetype of the powerful woman who opposed male control, a dangerous representation of femininity. The literary writings of the medieval era also incorporated Lilith as a symbol of what could happen if women crossed the limits imposed by society. In the Kabbalah book, for example, it is mentioned that Lilith is the mother of demons and the dark force that lives in the world, attracting those who fall into temptation. Through these stories, Lilith acquired a special relevance in esoteric circles, where magic and sorcery played an important role. For the Kabbalists, Lilith not only represented a sexual threat, but also a figure that represented chaos and anarchy in the divine order. But Lilith's myth was not only limited to her representation in painting and literature. His presence was deeply felt in medieval morality. Fear of the unknown, especially towards women who got rid of traditional roles, was at their peak. Women accused of witchcraft, who were perceived as a threat to the established order, were linked to Lilith. The figure of the woman who challenged social and religious expectations became a threat to the security of medieval society. Thus, Lilith was the personification of fear of overflowing femininity, independence, and power that challenged the norms of the church and patriarchy. Lilith in the Middle Ages was also seen as demons' mother, the leader of those who rebelled against heaven and morals. Legends associated her with the creation of malignant beings such as the night demons, which arose from their relationship with fallen angels. These stories fed the idea that Lilith was not only an isolated being, but also had followers and a kingdom in the shadows, where their influence and power extended beyond the earth. This vision of Lilith as the mother of infernal creatures consolidated her position as one of the most scary figures of medieval mythology. The medieval stories about Lilith not only perpetuated their image as a demonic being, but also helped forge the myth that surrounds it. The woman who dared to reject conventions and submission, the woman who challenged divine and human authority became a threat. And that threat materialized in Lilith, a being that symbolized the danger of the unknown, of the powerful and seductive woman who did not follow the rules. In the dark halls of the medieval castles, on the pages as of illuminated manuscripts, Lilith was around as a spectrum, always reminding us that what could not be controlled was what terrified the most. As society entered into modernity, a radical change began to take shape in the perception of historical and mythological figures. The world, shaken by social, political, and cultural revolutions, began to rethink the old narratives that had dominated for centuries. It was then that Lilith, the dreaded and despised medieval figure, began to resurface with a new identity, that of an icon of female resistance. What was previously seen as a symbol of subversion and chaos became an emblem of empowerment and release. In this modern Lilith rebirth, it was no longer simply a demonic figure that threatened the established order, but a strong, autonomous woman who challenged patriarchal structures. Lilith became a reference for those who struggled to break the chains of the oppressive system, and her story was reinterpreted through feminism lenses. His refusal to submit to Adam, his flight from Eden, his power over demons and their resistance to subordination were seen as acts of personal affirmation, of rebellion against a social order that only saw in women an extension of male power. Modernity, with its drastic changes in the perception of women, rediscovered Lilith as the representation of all those who refused to be silenced, to be subordinate. In a context of struggle for women's rights, Lilith resurfaced as a model of courage and autonomy. Instead of seeing her as the figure of the tempting, or that witch, she began to be celebrated as the woman who, for the first time in history, dared to say no to the male authority. His resistance, his refusal to bend to patriarchy, was an act of freedom, a form of personal autonomy that deeply resonated with modern women who faced contemporary struggles for equality and justice. In addition, Lilith acquired a new relevance in discussions about sexuality and power. In the Middle Ages, his figure was linked to sin, uncontrolled carnal desire, and dangerous seduction. But in modernity, this interpretation was replaced by a more complex and empowered vision. Lilith, instead of being a mere tempting, became a symbol of the woman who owns her own body, of her own sexuality, capable of making decisions about her life and destiny. Femininity was no longer seen as something to be repressed or controlled, but as something to be celebrated, in all its aspects, both in sexual freedom and in the right to self-determination. Lilith's reinterpretation also found fertile terrain in literature and arts. Authors and artists began to explore the figure of Lilith not only as a villain, but as a heroine that took control of her own narrative. In poetry, cinema, painting, and music, Lilith began to be represented as a complex and multifaceted figure, a woman who did not adjust to traditional molds and who, in doing so, became a figure of power and resistance. Its history became an allegory of the struggle for individual freedom, for female autonomy, for the ability to challenge and redefine the social norms that had been imposed for centuries. This modern Lilith rebirth can also be understood in the context of the boom of feminist movements, especially in recent decades. The stories of women who challenged oppression, who fought for their rights and their freedom, found in Lilith a powerful and relevant figure. In popular culture, from novels to songs, from essays to plays, Lilith began to be seen as a symbol of empowerment, not as a demon that should be feared, but as a model of resistance to injustice. Its history became a testimony of the inherent force to the woman who decides not to follow the norms imposed by a patriarchal society. Lilith was no longer just Adam's first wife, the figure that disobeyed and left Eden. It was much more than that. It had become a metaphor for the struggle for equality, justice, and freedom. Her independence, her rejection of submission, her ability to stay faithful to herself in a world that tried to suppress her, made her a lighthouse for modern women. At a time when female identity was constantly evolving and redefinition, Lilith stood as a figure that had not only survived myths and legends, but had transformed them into something new, something vibrant and full of meaning. Thus, Lilith was reborn in modernity not as a terrifying demon, but as a figure of power, resistance, and autonomy. Its history, challenged and adapted, he still had the same force as before, but now he was loaded with an energy that resonated with contemporary challenges and struggles. In each word, in each gesture, Lilith became a reminder that true freedom only comes when we are able to reject the chains imposed by others, to make our own decisions, and to write our own history. In the ancient lands of Mesopotamia, long before the figure of Lilith settled in Jewish traditions, there were already stories about female demons that stalked in the shadows, disturbing the balance between the human and the divine. In these myths, a dark, powerful and dangerous figure stood, Lamashtu. This demonic entity shared an intriguing relationship with Lilith, not only in its nature, but also in the way in which both represented chaos, darkness, and subversion of the established values. Lamashtu was a demonic goddess feared in ancient Mesopotamia, especially in the Sumerian and Babylon region. In many ways, Lamashtu embodied the terror of mothers and newborns. It was said that he robbed the children of their cribs, caused them diseases and killed them, leaving behind a trail of suffering and despair. Like Lilith, Lamashtu did not look like a simple figure of evil, but as a manifestation of deep fear towards the inexplicable and the uncontrollable. Both shared that ability to terrorize people through their power and darkness that surrounded them. The connection between Lilith and Lamashtu, however, is not just a matter of superficial similarities. In Mesopotamian legends, Lamashtu is described as a figure with hybrid characteristics, a being that was half a woman and half demon, with claws of lion and bird feet. Like Lilith, Lamashtu represented the rejection of the established order, chaos before the creation. While Mesopotamian society valued maternity and protection of the family, Lamashtu and Lilith challenged those expectations, destabilizing the family and social world by removing children and by introducing the danger in houses. In ancient stories, Lamashtu was described as a goddess who was hovering the houses during the night, attacking mothers who gave birth and vulnerable babies. His presence was feared, and therefore, protection rituals were performed, including amulets and sentences dedicated to Away. The terror that aroused Lamashtu looked a lot like Lilith's, Adam's first wife in later traditions, which, when leaving Eden and transforming into a night and dangerous being, became the representation of the deepest fears of humanity. Both figures shared the nature of female demons in several Mesopotamian cultures. In fact, Lamashtu was not the only one. There were other female deities and demons that were mentioned in the Sumerian and Babylonian texts. Lilith, although absent from the Mesopotamian myths in their exact form, was clearly linked to these representations of demonic women who threatened families and children's safety. In these stories, the power of these entities not only resided in their ability to steal lives, but also in their ability to manipulate human emotions, fear, pain, and despair. Connections between Lilith and Lamashtu are further reinforced when parallels are observed in myths related to sexuality and fertility. In ancient Mesopotamia, female sexuality, especially that related to motherhood, was seen as much as a blessing and a curse. While the protective goddesses were venerated by their ability to protect women in childbirth and ensure the health of children, figures such as Lamashtu or Lilith represented the shadow of this fertility, the dark, scary, and destructive aspect of procreation. Like Lilith in later traditions, Lamashtu also possessed the power to control fertility. Sometimes it was said that its presence could prevent conception or cause spontaneous abortions, which made it a threat not only for children's lives, but also for the very cycle of life. This terrifying power was linked to the notion that women, in their ability to give life, also possessed the power to destroy it, a recurring theme in myths about female demons in Mesopotamia. Throughout the history of humanity, the fears and beliefs of the ancient peoples have been shaping their myths and legends. The figure of Lamashtu, like Lilith, became a manifestation of what was not understood, of what could not be controlled, and what was feared. But beyond being a mere figure of evil, Lamashtu also reflected the fears and contradictions inherent to the human condition, the fascination with sexuality, fear of death, terror to the unknown and the uncontrollable. It is fascinating how, although separated by thousands of years and cultural differences, the myths of Lamashtu and Lilith share a common root. Both appear as powerful women who break social conventions, challenging the expectations of what a woman should be. While Lilith is known for her refusal to undergo Adam and her subsequent escape, Lamashtu reflects the same insubordination in her most destructive form, attacking those who look as more vulnerable in society, mothers and children. The history of Lilith, born of the Judeo-Christian tradition, and that of Lamashtu, of the former Mesopotamia, are ultimately stories on the same subject: the rebellion against the established, the power of women outside the social norms, and the fear that generates that liberation. In both figures, the fight against oppression and the imposition of gender roles is the key that unites their stories, showing that, despite centuries and cultural differences, fear of female autonomy has been a constant throughout of history. In Islam, Lilith does not occupy a prominent place in sacred texts, but the figure of the rebel and disobedient woman resonates in a surprising way with other demonic beings mentioned in the Quran and in Islamic traditions. Although Lilith's story as Adam's wife and her subsequent rebellion does not explicitly appear in the Quran, her image as a figure that defies the divine rules can be compared to the story of Iblis, the fallen angel who refuses to bow before Adam. The figure of Iblis, in the Islamic tradition, is one of the darkest and disobedient beings. Iblis, who before his fall was a devout jinn, refuses to bow before Adam when Allah orders him to do so. This negative, loaded with pride and challenge, results in his expulsion from paradise. From that moment on, Iblis becomes the leader of demons and the eternal enemy of humanity. This disobedience to the divine mandate is negative to submit, resonates disturbingly with the history of Lilith in Judeo-Christian traditions. In some Islamic stories, it is said that Iblis, like Lilith in other cultures, represents the principle of rebellion against divine will. The figure of Iblis is that of a being that, instead of accepting its place in the divine order, feels superior and rejects submission. The comparison between Iblis and Lilith is evident in the act of challenge towards divine authority, in its rejection of subordination. Both represent, in some way, the same principle, the struggle for autonomy, independence, and refusal to subordinate the human being or the divine will. Although Lilith does not appear directly in the Quran, some subsequent interpretations within Islamic traditions have also made analogies between the figure of Lilith and certain female demons that stalk men, particularly in relation to seduction and temptation. Islam, like other monotheistic religions, has developed a vast mythology on demonic beings that, in many ways, resemble Lilith's representations as a figure that personifies temptation and chaos. The connection with the jinn and the shayatin, demons of Islam, entities that are said to induce sin and perversion, is a link that cannot be overlooked. In the Islamic tradition, it is believed that the jinn are creatures created of fire, a race of invisible beings that, like humans, have free will. Of these jinn, some follow Allah's will, while others, such as Iblis, rebel and disobey divine orders. Although there is no exact equivalent figure of Lilith in the Quran, some stories of female demons, such as an Al-Qarina, a night creature that is believed to accompany women and tempt them to transgression, resonate with the figure of Lilith. This entity, often associated with seduction and perversion, is aligned with the most common interpretation of Lilith as a being that stalks men and induces them to temptation. In these stories, like Lilith in Jewish traditions, these demonic creatures not only threaten physical chaos, but also with the spiritual. They are often presented as forces that corrupt purity and morality, attracting individuals towards sin. This representation of demonic creatures in Islam, such as Iblis and the jinn, echoes the function of Lilith in other myths, where she stands as a seductive and dangerous force, associated with temptation and subversion of order divine. What makes the figure of Lilith especially intriguing in the Islamic tradition is its symbolic relationship with the concept of free will. Both Iblis and Lilith, although separated in time and space, share an essence. Both represent the ability to reject fate, the free will taken to the extreme of challenging the same divinity. In a deep sense, Lilith in Islam could be seen as a reflection of human rebel nature, where independence becomes a struggle, not only against divine expectations, but also against social, family and gender expectations. Like Iblis, Lilith could represent the rupture of what is considered a natural and divine order. In Islamic mythology, as in other monotheistic religions, the concept of temptation is closely linked to the internal spiritual struggle of the human being. It is believed that temptations not only come from demons, but also from the human heart itself, a concept similar to the role of Lilith, who represents not only external seduction, but also the chaos that springs from the deepest and most repressed desires. The Quran teaches that the true struggle of the human being is against his own ego and the temptations that arise from him, a parallel that can be drawn with the figure of Lilith and his constant challenge to the divine authority and the established moral order. In summary, although Lilith is not explicitly mentioned in Islam, its essence, its rebellion, and its relationship with seduction and temptation find echo in the demonic figures of the Islamic tradition, especially in the history of Iblis and the jinn. The concept of a being that refuses to accept its place in the divine order, which challenges authority and represents the rebellion against the established, has a deep resonance in both Islam and other religions, showing how the figures of Lilith and Iblis, despite their cultural and religious differences, they share a common symbol of resistance and challenge. In Christian traditions, Lilith does not occupy a formally recognized place in the canonical texts of the Old and New Testament, but his figure has endured over the centuries, especially in apocryphal legends and oral traditions. Despite his absence in the official Bible, Lilith's image as Adam's first wife and a rebel figure has deeply influenced the religious and popular interpretations of femininity, temptation, and independence. The oldest and most direct mention of Lilith in the Christian tradition comes from texts that were not included in the biblical canon, known as the Apocryphal. One of the most relevant is Ben Sira's Alphabet, a medieval text that recounts that Lilith was created by God in the same way that Adam, from the dust of the earth. This apocryphal story explains that Lilith was Adam's first wife, but that, due to his refusal to submit to him and his desire for equality, he rebelled against the divine order. Instead of accepting his subordinate role in the relationship with Adam, Lilith decided to flee from Eden, challenging God's mandate, and, according to some versions, became the mother of demons. Lilith's concept as a being of rebellion and autonomy against the divine mandate resonates with Adam's rejection to undergo a man's leadership, a recurring theme in the Christian tradition, especially in the context of the teachings on original sin and obedience. Although Ben Sira's Alphabet is not a canonical text, its influence has infiltrated many Christian traditions throughout the centuries, giving rise to popular representations and the construction of Lilith as a symbol of the woman who challenges the established norms. Another influential text in the figure of Lilith within the Christian tradition is the Book of Enoch, an apocryphal attributed to Enoch, Noah's great-grandfather. In this book, although Lilith is not explicitly mentioned, her figure is associated with fallen angels and with the rebellion against divine authority. The angels who descend to the earth and mix with human women are convicted, and this act of disobedience is connected to popular culture with the figure of Lilith. This text, like other apocryphal writings, helps to form Lilith's Christian vision as an entity that represents temptation, seduction, and moral transgression. The Christian tradition has also adopted Lilith in her popular stories and oral legends. In these stories, Lilith is presented as a night spirit, capable of spelling men and seduce them, but also as a threat to newborn children, who were attributed death or disease by their presence. This aspect of Lilith as a maternal and dangerous demon was integrated over time into popular Christian mythology, especially in Europe, where popular beliefs about supernatural and evil beings were common. Lilith became seen as a being that stalked women and tempted them, in a context that reflected the tensions between women and patriarchy and medieval societies. In addition to its representation as a seductive demonic, the figure of Lilith has been reinterpreted in various historical moments in Christianity as a representation of female independence and the rejection of the roles imposed on women in society. In the 19th and 20th centuries, the image of Lilith began to be used by feminist and literary movements to symbolize the struggle for female autonomy. The writers and thinkers who took inspiration in Lilith for their works, such as in symbolist poetry and in Romanticism, presented Lilith not only as a demon, but as a woman who refuses to be subjugated, who rejects the limits imposed by society and that seeks power and control over its destiny. In the Christian context, however, this interpretation has been problematic. Lilith's figure has been traditionally seen as a warning for women who disobey the norms established by the church and society. Instead of being a symbol of resistance, it has been seen as an example of what happens when women disobey the rules and rebel against the divine or earthly authorities. Thus, the figure of Lilith has been demonized, associated with evil, temptation, and moral corruption, and it has been tried to link it with the fall of Adam and Eve in Eden, whose original sin, according to the Christian tradition, brought suffering and death to the world. Although Lilith is not a central figure in the official education of Christianity, its influence on Christian culture has been remarkable. Through the centuries, its history has been subject to reinterpretations that have gone since their condemnation as a rebel and sinful woman to its adoption as a symbol of female power and autonomy. The Christian tradition, in its approach to sin, obedience, and subordination, has shaped Lilith's perception as a dangerous and transgressive character, while popular mythology has made it a figure that defies the traditional expectations of the women. Lilith's vision in Christianity has evolved over time. Of a demonic and dangerous figure in the first centuries of the Christian era, it has become an icon of female autonomy in literature and contemporary thinking. Despite the condemnation and demonization to which it has been submitted in many texts, Lilith remains a resistant symbol for those who seek to challenge the established norms and a reminder of the limits imposed on femininity and power. The figure of Lilith found fertile land in European folklore, where its characteristics were mixed with beliefs about witches, evil spirits, and female demons. Although its origin is found in Jewish and Mesopotamian traditions, Lilith was adopted, transformed, and reinterpreted into a Europe deeply influenced by the Christian religion, the fear of the unknown, and social tensions related to the role of women. During the Middle Ages and the Renaissance, Lilith began to be linked to the witches, especially in the popular stories that circulated in the villages and in the narratives that the inquisitors promoted to justify the persecutions. These stories spoke of women who paid with the devil, who seduced men, who stole children from their cribs or ill, and who performed dark rituals under the moonlight. Lilith, with his reputation of night spirit and his association with seduction and danger, fit perfectly into this construction of the witch's figure. It was not necessary to name it explicitly, its essence was there, in the shadows of the legends that terrified rural communities. In Europe, the figure of Lilith acquired a special notoriety as a being that threatened the purity and patriarchal structure of Christian societies. His image merged with that of women who challenged the norms, especially those who lived outside the social conventions, such as independent widows, healers, or women who did not marry. Lilith, with his rejection of submitting to Adam and divine norms, became an implicit symbol of women who did not need a man to define his existence. For a Europe obsessed with sexual morality and control of women, Lilith was the incarnation of chaos that should be controlled. Popular beliefs also associated Lilith with phenomena such as nightmares. In some places, it was said that she or her daughters, the succubes, visited men while they slept, seduced them, and steal vital energy. These stories not only reinforced the fear of Lilith, but also used to explain experiences such as sleep paralysis or erotic dreams, phenomena that at that time did not have an exp scientific living. Lilith was the perfect excuse to blame external forces of what was incomprehensible or socially unacceptable. In the regions of Northern Europe, Lilith's influence was intertwined with local traditions on evil female spirits. In Scandinavia, for example, there were Hulra stories, beautiful women who lived the forests and who could enchant men, bringing them to perdition. Although different in context, these myths shared with Lilith the idea of women as an both seductive and dangerous being. In the Slavic countries, the stories about the Rusalki, spirits of women who had died tragically and stalked near the water, also resonated with Lilith's narrative as a spirit that lived in inhospitable places after his exile from Eden. Lilith's association with European folklore was not limited to demons and witches. He also influenced beliefs about vindictive female spirits, especially those who sought to punish men. In several European cultures, there were stories of spectral women who appeared at night to torment those who had betrayed or abandoned them. Lilith, with her initial rejection of Adam and her role as a vindictive being, embodied this figure of the woman who does not forgive and returns to collect her debt. In the context of folklore related to children, Lilith also left his mark. In many European traditions, there were beliefs about malignant beings that stole babies or replaced them with changed creatures that brought misfortunes to families. Lilith, who according to some Jewish traditions killed newborns or claimed them as their own, implicitly integrated into these narratives. In some places, mothers placed amulets or religious symbols near the cribs to protect their children from these spirits, practices that remember the amulets used in Jewish traditions to protect Lilith's babies. In the arts and literature of medieval and Renaissance Europe, Lilith's influence also became evident. Although it is not always mentioned directly, its presence is intuited in the representation of dangerous and fatal women, such as the sirens that seduced the sailors to sink them, or the witches who threw spells to destroy their enemies. These images, transmitted through illuminated manuscripts, popular paintings, and ballads, perpetuated the idea of women as a being that should be controlled and that, in their natural state, could be a threat to the established order. Despite his demonization, Lilith also had an ambiguous role in European folklore. In some stories, it was presented as a power figure, someone who did not fear facing men or the norms that sought to restrict it. This aspect of Lilith as a strong and autonomous woman resonated in popular traditions, although more subtle, and prepared the ground for her eventual rediscovery and revaluation in later times. The figure of Lilith in European folklore is not only an echo of Jewish traditions, but a reflection of the tensions and fears of the societies of the time. Through the centuries, its history mixed with local beliefs, acquiring new forms and meanings that reveal both fear towards independent women and fascination with their power. And although in these narratives Lilith often appears as a threat, its influence endures as a complex symbol full of contradictions that continues to inspire generations. In African and Asian cultures, we find Lilith echoes in mythological figures that share their most emblematic features, their night nature, their challenge to social norms, and their connection with the feminine as a symbol of power and danger. Although Lilith, as such, is not explicitly part of African and Asian traditions, many of its characteristics resonate in the stories of similar entities that have inhabited the folklore of these continents for centuries. In Africa, legends about powerful female spirits are usually linked to nature, cycles of life and death, and motherhood. One of the most notable examples is that of Abiku in Yoruba cultures. Although it is not identical to Lilith, Abiku shares with her the reputation of being a spirit associated with children, especially those who die young. According to Yoruba beliefs, Abiku is a wandering spirit that returns again and again, born in a family just to die shortly after, causing pain and confusion. This link with children and maternal suffering remembers stories about Lilith as a figure that stalks newborns and brings unfortunate to families. However, in the African context, these narratives are often deeply intertwined with prot rituals ectors and the search for balance between the spiritual and earthly worlds. Another African example is that of the mummy wata, aquatic spirits that can be benevolent or dangerous, depending on how they are treated. Although mummy wata is usually represented as a being linked to water, its duality, the ability to grant wealth or misfortune, love or misfortune, has parallels with Lilith. Like Lilith, mummy wata embodies a female power that inspires both fear and fascination, and their stories often revolve around the attraction and danger they represent for men. In Asian cultures, we also find figures that reflect aspects of Lilith. In Hindu mythology, the stories about the Yakshinis have an interesting connection. Yakshinis are female spirits, often associated with fertility and nature, but they can also be dangerous if they are offended. Some descriptions present them as seductive that attract men towards their perdition, a feature that evokes Lilith's narrative as a succubus and night figure. In addition, the Yakshinis usually inhabit in remote places, such as forests or caves, a parallel with Lilith, who, after his flight, was established in places far from civilization. In Japanese folklore, Yuki-onna, or snow women, also share similarities with Lilith. These spectral figures usually appear during snowstorms and, according to legends, are presented as women of extraordinary beauty that attract travelers to their death. Although the Yuki-onna lacks the background of rebellion and challenge of Lilith, its connection with nature, its aura of mortal seduction, and its independence from the human world reflect some of the most prominent aspects of Lilith's myth. In Western Asia, specifically in the Mesopotamian and Arab traditions, figures arise that are directly related to Lilith or share their roots. In the ancient Mesopotamian beliefs, the Lilitu, female demons that were around at night and attacked men while they slept. These entities, like Lilith, are associated with seduction, sexuality, and danger. In Arab cultures, the figure of al-Subyan is linked to fears of spirits that affect children and mothers. It is described as a being that attacks newborns, a narrative that remembers warnings about Lilith in Jewish traditions. Islam also presents figures that can be considered parallel to Lilith, although not directly. The jinn, supernatural beings that inhabit an intermediate plane between humans and angels, are often described as unpredictable and dangerous. Among them, the stories about female jinn, such as the Qareen, share certain features with Lilith, especially in their ability to seduce and cause harm to humans. The Qareen, in particular, are represented as spirits that accompany people from birth, and although they are not always evil, they have the ability to influence the emotions and actions of their hosts. In Chinese myths, we find figures such as Huli Jing, or spiritual foxes, who can transform into beautiful women to seduce men. Although Huli Jing are not inherently malignant, their ability to cause chaos in the lives of those who find them make them comparable to Lilith in terms of their disruptive influence. The Huli Jing, like Lilith, personifies a female force that defies traditional norms and expectations, although in this case the approach is more linked to wisdom and supernatural power. In all these cultures, the figure of Lilith, either in its direct representations or in its symbolic echoes, seems to embody a universal theme: fear and fascination towards women who deviate from the norms, who exercise power beyond what's understandable and that challenge the dominant power structures. Both in Africa and in Asia, these figures show that Lilith's myth transcends borders and adopts new ways to adapt to local beliefs and concerns. These female entities, although diverse in their manifestations, share a conductive thread that connects them with Lilith. They are a reflection of fear and admiration for the feminine as an uncontrollable power, which can be both protective and destructive. Its presence in the folklore of Africa and Asia demonstrates that the stories of women who defy the established order are not exclusive to a culture, but are part of the human collective imaginary. Lilith in the art and literature of the Middle East. Lilith, although better known for her presence in the Jewish tradition, has also left a significant mark on the stories and literature of the Middle East, particularly in Persian and Hebrew traditions. His figure has evolved throughout the centuries, adopting various facets that reflect the concerns, fears, and fantasies of the cultures of this region. Hebrew stories. Lilith as a symbol of rebellion and danger. In Hebrew literature, Lilith emerges as a complex character that combines elements of danger, seduction, and resistance. One of the most relevant texts in the Jewish tradition that mentions Lilith is Ben Sira's Alphabet, 8x AD, where he describes himself as Adam's first wife. According to this story, Lilith was created of the same dust as Adam, but when he refused to submit to him, he escaped to the Red Sea, where he took refuge and began his life as an independent and feared figure. In this text, Lilith is also related to the fear of demons and the danger for newborn children and women in childbirth. These ideas led to the use of protective amulets in the Hebrew tradition, registering the names of the three angels sent to pursue it: Sinoi, Sansonoi, and Semenelof. These amulets often included images that represented Lilith as a demonic figure with wings and claws, accentuating their role as a supernatural threat. In addition, in rabbinic and Cabal literature, Lilith appears as the consort of Samel, the angel of death, with whom it forms a symbolic union that represents evil, chaos, and the rupture of divine harmony. In the Zohar, the main Cabalistic text, Lilith is described as a night figure that is around victims, reinforcing its image as a dangerous and seductive spirit. Persian stories. Lilith and connections with female demons. In the Persian tradition, although Lilith does not appear explicitly with her name, there are female demonic figures that share similarities with her, such as Peris and Devas. The Peris, although in many stories they are benevolent spirits, can also appear as dangerous entities that seduce men and cause chaos in their lives. On the other hand, the Devas are evil spirits that work in opposition to the principles of light and order in the Zoroastric religion. An interesting parallel is the connection between Lilith and the figure of Azi-Dahaka, the dragon or demon that embodies chaos in Persian mythology. Although Azi-Dahaka is a male entity, the stories about female demons associated with him reinforce the idea of dangerous female figures that act against humanity. In some interpretations, Lilith could have absorbed aspects of these Persian figures as myths crossed between the cultures of the Middle East. Lilith in the art of the Middle East. The representation of Lilith in the art of the Middle East is scarce, but elements associated with it can be traced in female demonic figures represented in amulets, reliefs, and illuminated texts. In the ancient Mesopotamian reliefs, for example, winged female figures can be found as the famous representation known as the Burney relief, or Queen of the Night, circa 1800 to 1750 BC. Although there is no consensus on whether this figure directly represents Lilith, its association with night attributes, wings, and claws has led many scholars to consider it a possible visual precursor of Lilith in subsequent traditions. In medieval Jewish art, Lilith appears in illustrations of manuscripts and engravings, where it is represented as a demonic figure. These images usually accentuate their dangerous nature, showing it with animal features, such as claws or wings, and surrounded by protective symbols that reinforce their association with evil and the need for protection against it. Lilith as literary inspiration. In the Middle East. In Persian literature, Lilith's echoes can be found in the stories of supernatural women that defy social norms. For example, in the stories of the 1001 Nights, although Lilith does not appear directly, the recurring theme of women who manipulate or challenge men can be influenced by similar narratives. The female figures in these stories are usually complex, oscillating between the victim and the villain, the protector and the destructive, reflecting ambivalence towards the feminine that also characterizes the myth of Lilith. In the most modern Hebrew traditions, Lilith has been reinterpreted in literature as a symbol of female rebellion and resistance against oppression. Contemporary poets and writers have resumed their history to explore female identity, power, and emancipation issues, recognizing Lilith not only as a demonic figure, but as a manifestation of human desire for freedom and autonomy. The figure of Lilith, as it appears in the Persian and Hebrew stories, reveals the deep influence of cultural and religious narratives in the Middle East. Either as a night demon, a mother of demons, or a rebel who refuses to submit, Lilith embodies both fears and human aspirations around female power and independence. Its impact on the art and literature of the Middle East show how a myth can adapt and evolve, acquiring new meanings in different cultural contexts. Lilith has been interpreted throughout history as a symbol of rebellion, mystery, and danger, but in the field of deep psychology, its figure reaches a new level of meaning, that of the archetype of the shadow, according to the ideas developed by Carl Jung. In this context, Lilith not only represents a mythological or demonic entity, but also a hidden and repressed part of the human psyche, an inner force that struggles to come to light and be recognized. The shadow. According to Carl Jung described the shadow as an essential aspect of the psyche, that part of ourselves that contains everything we prefer not to face. Fears, repressed desires, unacceptable impulses, prohibited emotions. The shadow is what we deny and reject, but which, however, continues to influence our decisions, thoughts, and behaviors. Lilith, in its essence, embodies this concept. She is the figure that defies the established norms, which refuses to submit, which embraces the darkest aspects of its nature instead of hiding them. His story is that of a woman who, being rejected for not fulfilling social and religious expectations, finds power in her independence and in the exploration of the forbidden. Lilith as the rejection of the repressed. In the myth, Lilith leaves Eden when he is required to undergo Adam. This act of rebellion can be seen as the decision not to suppress its true nature. In psychological terms, it represents a part of us who refuses to be molded or controlled by external norms. Lilith symbolizes what happens when the conscious self attempts to quell the aspects of the shadow. Those repressed elements do not disappear, but find more powerful and dangerous ways to manifest. Just as Lilith becomes a feared figure, the repressed aspects of our psyche can also become internal demons that torment us. Repressed anger, denied desire, suppressed autonomy, all these elements look for ways to get out, often destructive ways. Lilith's myth reflects this eternal conflict between desire in conformity and the need for authenticity. Lilith and the projection of the shadow. In many cultures, Lilith has been portrayed as an external danger, a seductive, a mother of demons, a threat to children and men. However, from the Jungian perspective, this representation is nothing more than a projection of the collective shadow. Society, by rejecting and fearing certain aspects of femininity, such as sexuality, independence, and power, projects them on figures such as Lilith, transforming it into a symbol of everything that is feared and repressed. In Jung psychology, the projection of the shadow occurs when we attribute to others the characteristics that we do not want to recognize in ourselves. In this sense, Lilith becomes a mirror of collective fears, especially in relation to female autonomy and sexual power. His figure reveals not only what society fears of women, but also what women, inside, could fear themselves. Lilith and the individual face the shadow. For Jung, the process of individuation, the path to integration and psychological fullness, requires facing the shadow. This implies recognizing and accepting those parts of ourselves that we have rejected. Lilith, in this sense, is a powerful guide. Its history invites us to look at what scares us about our own nature, the desire for freedom, repressed anger, the impulses that we consider dark or unacceptable. Facing Lilith within our psyche means accepting that we are not perfect, that we have desires and emotions that do not fit the ideals that society imposes on us. But it also means discovering the power that lies in our authenticity. Lilith, as an archetype of the shadow, teaches us that what we reject of ourselves is not necessarily bad, but simply part of our totality. The shadow and the power of integration. In the integration of the shadow, Lilith ceases to be a feared demon and becomes an ally. Its strength, its independence, its connection with the hidden and the forbidden, all this can be transformed into sources of power and wisdom. When we stop afraid of Lilith, that is, when we stop fearing in our shadow, we can claim those parts of ourselves that make us complete. Lilith, then, is not just an archetype of the dark, but also of the liberating. Its history reminds us that we cannot be truly free if we deny parts of our nature. In Jungian terms, integratio Lilith means embrace the balance between light and dark, between the conscious and the unconscious. Lilith as a symbol of personal transformation. Lilith's story also has a deeply transformative dimension. His exile, his rebellion, his decision to embrace his own nature despite the consequences, all this makes it a symbol of those moments in which we face our shadow and choose to accept it. This acceptance is not easy, it implies a process of pain and confrontation. But, like Lilith, this process can lead us to a place of greater power and authenticity. In mythology, Lilith transforms a wife in Eden to a feared and powerful figure that reigns in the margin of the acceptable. In psychology, this transformation reflects what happens when we integrate our shadow. We become more complete beings, capable of hugging both light and darkness within us. Lilith's story, as an archetype of the shadow, remains deeply relevant. It challenges us to look inside ourselves, to face what we fear, and find power in what we have rejected. What parts of yourself are you willing to redeem? Lilith as chaos carrier. In the rich mythological and symbolic narrative that surrounds Lilith, his figure is closely associated with chaos, a primary force that challenges the established order and destroys rigid structures to give way to the transformation. As a carrier of chaos, Lilith embodies the duality between order and chaos, a universal tension that defines the balance of existence itself. Chaos as a primary force. Chaos, in most mythological traditions, is a creative and destructive force that precedes order. In the ancient Mesopotamian and Hebrew cosmologies, chaos is represented as the initial state of the universe before creation, an intermittent space that needs to be molded. However, chaos is also necessary for change, since excess order can lead to rigidity and stagnation. Lilith, as a rebel figure, inhabits this border between chaos and order. Its refusal to submit to Adam or the divine laws makes it a symbol of rupture with the established norms. She not only abandons the order of Eden, but also carries with him the destabilizing power of chaos, challenging the traditional notions of hierarchy, gender, and power. Lilith and the order. Chaos duality. In the myth, Lilith represents chaos in opposition to the order of Eden, a place designed to reflect harmony and obedience. His rejection of submitting to Adam breaks this idealized balance, introducing a disruptive force in the world. This duality can be interpreted in several ways. 1. Order as compliance and submission. Eden symbolizes a tax order, where each being must fulfill a predetermined role. Lilith rejects this role, preferring freedom and autonomy, even if that means entering the chaos of exile. 2. Chaos as freedom and change. Although chaos can be terrifying, it is also the source of new possibilities. Lilith's decision to leave Eden and look for his own path can be seen as an act of personal and collective transformation. She introduces chaos as a necessary force for growth. Lilith's role as a chaos carrier. Lilith not only embodies chaos, he also takes him where he goes. In Jewish and Mesopotamian traditions, it is described as a figure that disturbs the social and cosmic order. In her role as the mother of demons, night seductive and queen of the underworld, Lilith introduces elements of disorder and danger in the lives of those who find her. However, this disturbance is not purely negative, it is also a reminder that the absolute order is unsustainable without its opposite. Time, sexual chaos, and the subversion of control. Lilith is a figure deeply associated with sexuality and seduction, two forces that are traditionally seen as sources of chaos in patriarchal societies. When claiming his own sexual agency, Lilith defies the rules of control and chastity, becoming a symbol of empowerment and the uncontrollable. Times the power of exile. When leaving Eden and inhabiting the unknown and dangerous regions of the world, Lilith carries with him the chaos of what cannot be tamed. His figure embodies exile as a form of freedom, but also as a break with the stability of the home and the community. Lilith in the context of psychology and philosophy. From a psychological and philosophical perspective, Lilith can be understood as a manifestation of the chaos necessary for the process of individuals and personal transformation. Carl Jung describes the balance between opposites, orders and chaos, light and shadow, as essential for the full development of the human being. Lilith, as an archetype, challenges to accept chaos within ourselves, to integrate our messy impulses and find balance in the tension between opposite forces. In philosophical terms, Lilith aligns with the ideas of Friedrich Nietzsche, who celebrates chaos as a necessary condition for creativity and change. His famous aphorism, "One must have chaos within himself to give birth to a dancer star," resounds deeply with the figure of Lilith, who, when rebelling against the tax order, creates a new reality for herself. Lilith and the myth of the eternal return. In ancient cultures, chaos is not only a negative state, but also an essential stage in cosmic cycles of destruction and renewal. Lilith, as chaos carrier, represents this eternal cycle. His figure appears in times of crisis, when existing structures can no longer be sustained and need to be dismantled to give way to something new. For example, in his role as Night Seductive, Lilith not only brings danger but also the opportunity to face and transform the deepest fears. Similarly, in his relationship with Samhael, the Angel of Death, Lilith is associated with the dissolution of the old and the beginning of the unknown. Lilith and chaos in modernity. In modernity, Lilith has become a symbol of resistance against oppressive systems. In feminist and artistic movements, it is claimed as a force of change, a figure that questions patriarchal norms and offers an alternative vision of power and autonomy. Its association with chaos is no longer perceived as something destructive, but as a tool to challenge the status quo and open paths towards equality and creativity. Lilith and sex, female sexuality. In myths, the figure of Lilith, deeply rooted in Jewish, Mesopotamian mythology and other traditions, is closely linked to female sexuality. It represents a powerful, autonomous, and often feared expression of sexuality, challenging the traditional patriarchal models that sought to control it. Lilith has been seen as a symbol of uncontrollable desire, sexual independence, and the perceived threat that female empowerment could represent in societies dominated by men. Lilith and sexuality. In Eden, the conflict with Adam. Lilith's representation as Adam's first wife, according to some apocryphal texts such as Ben Sira's alphabet, establishes his initial connection with sexuality. In these stories, Lilith was created equal to Adam, not from his rib, but of the same dust as him, which symbolizes an essential parity. However, the conflict arises when Lilith refuses to assume a submissive position during the sexual act. Instead of accepting her passive paper from her, Lilith demands equality in her relationship with Adam, including her position during sex. This act of resistance is not only a matter of pride, but also an affirmation of its sexual autonomy and its right to experience pleasure in its own terms. His refusal to submit leads to his exile, making it a marginalized figure, but also an icon of freedom and empowerment. Lilith's sexuality as power and threat. After his exile to the Red Sea, Lilith assumes a new identity as a symbol of non-repressed female sexuality. In the Jewish tradition, it is described as a night seductive that attacks men while they sleep, causing erotic dreams. This representation reinforces Lilith's idea as a figure that embodies uncontrolled sexual desire, something that patriarchal societies feared and demonized. Lilith is also portrayed as the mother of succubes, female demons that seduce men in the medieval tradition. These creatures, like Lilith, personify a female sexuality that defies the norms and exercise power over men, often linked to the loss of control, sin, and danger. Although he is the mother of demons, his ability to engender demonic beings reflects a creative power that operates outside the divine and human laws. Lilith does not submit to the role of traditional mother, but uses her fertility as an expression of her autonomy, which challenges gender expectations. Lilith and male-female sexuality control. Lilith's myth can be interpreted as an allegory of the historical attempt to control female sexuality. In patriarchal thinking, female sexual pleasure has been traditionally seen as something that must be contained, limited to the scope of marriage, and oriented exclusively to procreation. Lilith, on the other hand, represents a free and uninhibited sexuality, one that is not subject to male desire or as social institutions. Lilith's demonization as a dangerous seductive also reflects male fears towards not controlled female desire. When labeling Lilith as a demon, patriarchal societies not only repressed their narrative, but also demonized any form of female sexuality that would not fit the traditional roles of wife and mother. Lilith's modern reinterpretation and her sexuality in contemporary thinking, Lilith has been adopted as a symbol of female sexual empowerment. Feminist and artistic movements have reinterpreted their history, transforming it from a demonic figure to a tragic heroine that struggles for its right to autonomy and sexual pleasure. In this modern vision, Lilith represents the rejection of sexual submission. His refusal to undergo Adam is seen as an affirmation of his equality and his right to decide on his own body. The right to pleasure, Lilith does not repress his sexual desire or subordinates to the needs of others, becoming a model of erotic freedom. The fight against sexual shame. As an archetype, Lilith challenges the narrative of shame associated with female sexuality in many cultures. Lilith in sexual psychology. From a psychological perspective, Lilith can be interpreted as an archetype that reflects repressed aspects of female sexuality in the collective unconscious. Carl Jung suggested that archetypes such as Lilith represent internal forces that need to integrate to achieve individuation. Lilith's myth not only explores historical fears towards female sexuality, but also offers an alternative vision of erotic power as a transformative and emancipatory force. Over the centuries, Lilith has been demonized for its rejection of conforming to gender expectations, but in modernity, it has become a symbol of resistance and freedom. Ultimately, Lilith invites us to reflect on our own attitudes towards female sexuality and question the narratives that perpetuate repression and control. What really does it mean to own your own desire? To what extent Lilith challenges us to reconsider what we understand by sexual power and autonomy? Lilith, as a carrier of chaos, reminds us that disorder and rupture are essential parts of life. Although chaos can be terrifying, it is also a liberating force that allows transformation and growth. In his role as mythological and archetypal symbol, Lilith invites us to confront rigid structures in our lives, to accept chaos as a natural part of existence, and to embrace the opportunities that arise in the midst of uncertainty. What can we learn from Lilith about our relationship with chaos? Are we willing to let the uncontrollable transform us? Lilith as a women's protector, the evolution of an empowering figure over the centuries, Lilith has gone from being a feared and demonized figure to a symbol of strength and autonomy for women. Its rejection of submission, its independence, and its connection with the forbidden have been reinterpreted by feminist, spiritual, and cultural movements as a manifestation of female power and protection. Lilith, which was once represented as a danger, has become a resistance icon against patriarchal oppression and a symbolic protector of women in their struggles for equality and freedom. Of demon to women's ally in the oldest traditions, such as Ben Sira's alphabet and rabbinic texts, Lilith was described as a hostile entity towards men and children, symbolizing a constant danger for mothers in childbirth and newborns. However, even in these initial representations, Lilith had a tacit bond with the feminine, because her figure seemed to keep a connection with the world of women, especially in the spheres of motherhood, sexuality, and domestic power. Over time, Lilith's modern readings have claimed their figure, transforming it into a women's protector against the systems that submit them. His myth has been reinterpreted as a warning against the attempt to silence female voices and as a guide for those who seek to claim their space in a world that has often privileged men. Lilith and the female resistance. 1. The rejection of submission. Lilith was the first woman to challenge male authority. His refusal to submit to Adam in Genesis is an act that, in the modern context, symbolizes resistance against patriarchal structures. This moment of rebellion makes Lilith a precursor to feminist struggles, someone who chose exile and freedom before obedience and oppression. In this sense, Lilith rises as a figure that inspires women to question gender norms, demand equality, and resist any form of domination. 2. Sexual and emotional empowerment. Lilith not only rejected submission expectations, but also embraced her emotional and sexual autonomy. In feminist interpretations, this makes it a symbol of empowerment for women looking to free themselves from stigmas associated with their sexuality and desires. 3. Protector of marginalized women. Many contemporary readings see Lilith as a protector of women who face injustices, especially those marginalized by their resistance to traditional roles. In this context, Lilith not only represents strength, but also comfort and solidarity for those who choose to live authentically, although this means challenging social norms. Lilith as an archetype of power in modern feminism. Lilith has been adopted as a central symbol in modern feminism due to its ability to embody multiple facets of female power. Instead of being seen as a dark and demonic figure, it has become an archetype that represents the strength, courage and resilience of women. 1. Equality symbol. Lilith symbolizes the struggle for gender equality. Its equal creation to Adam in the myth of Genesis highlights that female subordination is not something inherent, but a cultural construction that can and should be challenged. 2. Protection and resistance figure. In this new interpretation, Lilith is seen as a guardian for women who face abuse or discrimination. Its history inspires those who fight against harassment, salary inequality, gender violence, and other contemporary problems. 3. Spiritual guide. In feminist and neo-pagan spiritual movements, Lilith is venerated as a goddess or protective spirit. It is invoked as a force that guides women towards personal freedom, self-acceptance, and the ability to claim their own power. Lilith in contemporary spirituality. 1. Neo-paganism and Wicca. Lilith has been adopted by modern spiritual traditions such as Wicca and neo-paganism. Here, Lilith is considered a dark goddess that symbolizes female independence and strength. It is invoked in rituals to empower women, help them break with oppressive patterns, and connect with their divine energy. 2. Psychology and archetypes. From Carl Jung's perspective and other psychologists, Lilith can be seen as an archetype of female shadow, representing repressed or rejected aspects of the psyche. Integrating Lilith into consciousness means accepting and embracing these rejected parts, which leads to greater self-acceptance and personal growth. Lilith in the modern world. Examples of empowerment. 1. Lilith Fair. The Lilith Fair music festival, founded in the 90s, adopted the name of Lilith as a symbol of female empowerment in the music industry. This event brought together female artists around the world and highlighted the importance of gender equality in the cultural field. 2. Feminist art and literature. Lilith's image has been widely used in feminist poetry, and literature. Many authors present it as a hero that inspires women to resist restrictive norms and find strength in their individuality. 3. Politics and activism. In political speeches and social movements, Lilith is cited as an example of resistance to oppression. His figure inspires those who seek to challenge the norms that perpetuate inequality and exclusion. Lilith has traveled a long way from its initial representation as a demon to become a protection and empowerment icon. Its history, although deeply rooted in ancient traditions, remains relevant in the modern struggle for gender equality and personal autonomy. As a symbolic protector of women, Lilith recalls that freedom and power are not granted, but are claimed. It represents the necessary courage to reject submission and commitment to live an authentic life, regardless of consequences. Ultimately, Lilith invites us all to hug what makes us strong, brave, and, above all, free. Lilith and dreams. His presence in nightmares and night visions. From the Prim Eros mythological stories, Lilith has been associated with the mysteries of the night, dreams, and nightmares. As a figure linked to the hidden and the unknown, its presence in the kingdom of the dreamlike is both feared and fascinating. In several traditions, Lilith appears as an entity that lives dreams, especially those related to desire, fear, and supernatural. His role in nightmares and night visions has been interpreted in different ways, from a warning symbol to a bridge to the darkest corners of the unconscious. Lilith as a dream visitor. 1. The woman of the night. Lilith is known in ancient texts, such as Mesopotamian and Hebrew traditions, as a creature of the night, a liminal time between the conscious and subconscious world. It was believed that Lilith visited men while they slept, causing erotic or disturbing dreams, reinforcing their connection with temptation and repressed desire. 2. Night nightmares and night demons. In medieval and folk stories, Lilith is described as a spirit that brings nightmares, especially children. This aspect of its myth can be interpreted as a reflection of the fears associated with vulnerability during sleep, when minds are more susceptible to the influence of the unknown. 3. Manifestations in dreams of women. In women's dreams, Lilith can appear as a powerful or terrifying figure. For some traditions, its appearance symbolizes an internal conflict, a struggle between wishes for independence and fears imposed by social norms. In this context, Lilith is not only an intruder, but also a guide towards self-knowledge. Lilith in nightmares. Fear archetype. 1. The weight of guilt and desire. In many cultures, nightmares have been interpreted as a manifestation of faults or repressed desires. Lilith, being associated with sensuality and rebellion, often appears in dreams as a reminder of these unresolved emotions. His image in nightmares can adopt disturbing forms, such as a woman of disturbing beauty or a shadow that lurks. 2. The oppression of the night. The Mesopotamian tradition associates Lilith with the demons Lilu and Liltu, which caused night terror. It was said that these beings perched on their victims while they slept, hindering breathing and causing momentary paralysis. This keeps a remarkable similarity with the modern experiences of sleep paralysis, where dark or terrifying figures seem to stalk the sleeping. 3. Mother of the succubes. As the mother of the succubes, Lilith is associated with female demons that seduce men during their dreams, draining their vital energy. These stories, which arose in the Middle Ages, reinforce their link with the nightmares of erotic content and the idea of the night invasion. Night visions and warnings. 1. A change in the interpretation of dreams. Lilith can appear as a symbolic figure that represents a necessary change or a call to face the repressed aspects of personality. His presence in a night vision could be interpreted as a reminder of the need to confront fears, desires, or secrets that have been buried. 2. The voice of autonomy. For those who perceive it as a resistance symbol, Lilith can appear in dreams as a guide towards independence and inner strength. In these cases, its appearance does not generate fear, but inspires courage to face challenges in life awake. 3. The archetypal shadow. According to Jungian psychology, Lilith could embody shadow, the repressed or not accepted aspects of oneself. Its appearance in dream visions may indicate the need to integrate this shadow, facing both fears and desires associated with it. Lilith in the modern interpretation of dreams. 1. Feminism and empowerment. In modern contexts, especially within the framework of feminism and female spirituality, Lilith is interpreted as a symbol of empowerment. In dreams, he could represent a call to claim autonomy, especially for those who feel they have lost their personal power in the awake world. 2. Sexual and emotional exploration. Your connection with erotic dreams may reflect a desire to explore sexuality and repressed feelings. For some women, Lilith appears as a figure that defies social norms on pleasure and desire, inviting them to hug their true nature. 3. Warning or recognition. In some cases, dreaming of Lilith can be interpreted as a warning, a reminder of the consequences of ignoring the inner voice or succumbing to fear. Alternatively, its appearance can be a recognition of an inner force who has remained latent. Lilith and the spiritual dimension of dreams. In the context of contemporary spirituality, Lilith is seen as a guide towards self-discovery through dreams. Many spiritual traditions consider sleep as a door to other planes of existence, where Lilith can act as a teacher or a challenger. His presence, although often disturbing, invites a deep reflection on desires, fears, and personal transformation potential. Lilith, as a visitor to dreams and nightmares, remains a powerful symbol of the hidden, the repressed, and the unknown. From cinema to literature and music, his figure has been reinterpreted as an icon of female power, seduction, rebellion, and mystery. Bordello of Blood, 1996. Lilith appears as the queen of vampires in this horror film, consolidating her association with the world of the dead and lethal seduction. The Chilling Adventures of Sabrina, 2018 to 2020. In this series, Lilith is a key figure, presented as the mother of demons and an allied enemy of Sabrina, highlighting her power and her struggle for control. 2. Symbolism and female antiheroes. In more recent films, Lilith becomes a symbol of female resistance and power. Its challenging character against patriarchal norms inspires the creation of strong and complex female characters, which channel their essence without referring directly to it. Lilith in literature. 1. Classic and modern stories. Lilith has been explored in various literary genres, from poetry to speculative fiction. Lilith, 1895, by George MacDonald, a classic fantasy novel that portrays Lilith as a complex character, an evil queen who finally seeks redemption. This book marked one of Lilith's first significant literary appearances in the modern era. The Brass Bible, 1971, by Janet and Stuart Farrar, a key text in the Neo-Pagana spirituality that presents Lilith as a figure of female power and connection with nature. 2. Contemporary literature. Lilith appears frequently in fantasy and science fiction novels. In the Sandman saga of Neil Gaiman, Lilith is mentioned as the mother of demons and a key figure in the history of humanity and the underworld. Lilith's Brood, by Octavia E. Butler, although not directly related to the myth, this trilogy uses the name Lilith for the main character, evoking his associations with the feminine, the mysterious, and the transformation. 3. Poetry and symbolism. Poets like Dante Gabriel Rossetti and Sylvia Plath have explored the figure of Lilith in her works, linking her with dangerous beauty and feminine power. In Rossetti's poem Body's Beauty, Lilith is described as the lovely snake that seduces and dominates. Lilith in Music 1. Songs and bands inspired by Lilith. The figure of Lilith has influenced numerous musical artists, who have used it as a symbol of rebellion, femininity, and darkness. Lilith, by Ellie Goulding, 2015. A song that explores themes of seduction and power, inspired by Lilith's mythical nature. Lilith Fair, 1997–1999, revived in 2010. A music festival founded by Sarah McLachlan that celebrated women in music. The festival's name reflects Lilith's connection with female empowerment and independence too. Lilith in rock and metal genres such as gothic rock and metal have adopted the figure of Lilith for its dark and transgressive symbolism. Lilith Immaculate, by Cradle of Filth, this black metal band celebrates Lilith as a symbol of mortal beauty and demonic power. Mother Lilith, by Their Ion, an ode to the mythical figure, highlighting his duality as the mother of demons and bearer of power. Lilith on television and video games. 1. Television series. Lilith appears on several television series as a key figure in supernatural stories. Supernatural, 2005–2020. Lilith is presented as a powerful demon and one of the main antagonists of the first seasons. True Blood, 2008–2014. In this series of vampires, Lilith is considered the mother of all vampires, a venerated and feared figure. 2. Video games. Lilith is a recurring character in video games, especially in fantasy and terror titles. Devil 4, 2023. Lilith is the main antagonist, represented as a powerful demonic entity with a complex relationship with humanity. Borderlands, 2009–2023. Lilith is one of the playable characters and a symbol of female power in this popular game of shooting and adventure. Lilith as an icon in modern art. 1. Visual art. Lilith has inspired visual artists, who portray it as a seductive and dangerous beauty figure. His image appears frequently in paintings, comics and book covers, consolidating his place as a muse of the hidden and the supernatural. 2. Contemporary symbolism. In contemporary art, Lilith represents not only female power, but also resistance against patriarchal power structures. His figure is a source of inspiration for activism and exploration of female identity. Lilith has transcended its role in religious and mythological texts to become a cultural icon that symbolizes the rebellion, power, and complexity of the feminine. His influence on cinema, literature, music, and other artistic media is a testimony of his ability to resonate with the challenges and aspirations of each era. As an ambivalent figure that combines beauty, danger, and autonomy, Lilith remains a mirror in which humanity explores its deepest fears, desires, and struggles. Astrological Lilith. Lilith's role in modern astrology. In modern astrology, Lilith has been incorporated as a key point to explore the depths of the human psyche, the repressed aspects of personality, and struggles for power and autonomy. Although Lilith is not a planet or a physical body, its influence focuses on the symbolic and the psychological, and is linked to shadow, sexuality, rebellion, and empowerment. In astrology, Lilith manifests itself in 3 main ways. 1. The Black Moon. Black Moon Lilith. It represents the lunar peak, the farthest point of the orbit of the Moon in relation to the Earth. This mathematical point is associated with the repressed, the hidden and subconscious energies related to personal power, sexuality, and the desire for freedom. 2. The Lilith asteroid. It is a real light blue body, discovered in 1927, which orbits between Mars and Jupiter. In astrology, this asteroid is linked to Lilith's archetype as an independent, enigmatic, and creative female figure. 3. The Algol star. Occasionally, Lilith is symbolically related to the fixed star Algol, known as the demonic star, which also has connotations of danger, challenge, and uncontrolled female power. The Black Moon Lilith. In the native charter, Lilith is a crucial point in the native charter, representing what the individual needs to face to achieve authenticity. The main themes associated with their position are: 1. Sexuality and power. Lilith reveals the most raw and authentic aspects of sexuality. Its position indicates where the person could experience repressed desires, taboos, or power struggles related to intimacy. 2. Autonomy and rebellion. Lilith points out the areas where the individual rebels against social norms or seeks to affirm his independence. It is a symbol of oppression resistance. 3. The personal shadow. This point shows the aspects of the psyche that have been denied or rejected. Working with Lilith implies integrating these hidden parts to achieve emotional and psychological balance. Lilith in astrological signs and houses. 1. Lilith in the signs. In each zodiac sign, Lilith adopts a different quality, highlighting the specific challenges and opportunities related to the characteristics of the sign. For example, in Aries, Lilith emphasizes the need for independence and self-affirmation. In Scorpio, intensifies transformation issues, sexuality and emotional power. In Libra, it can reflect struggles in relationships, justice, and balance between the self and the other. 2. Lilith in the houses. His house position shows the life area where Lilith's energies are manifested. For example, in House 1, Identity, it suggests a magnetic but misunderstood personality. In House 7, Relations, it indicates tensions in intimacy and in the dynamics of power as a couple. In House 10, Career, you can point out authority struggles and search for recognition for your own merits. Lilith aspects with other planets. 1. Conjunction. When Lilith is in conjunction with personal planets, such as the Sun, the Moon or Venus, intensifies its influence on identity, emotions, or love life. 2. Opposition. Lilith's opposition with other planets suggests internal conflicts related to the issues it represents, such as power, sexuality, or autonomy. 3. Trigo or sextile. These harmonic aspects indicate the ability to integrate Lilith's energies positively, using his strength for personal growth. Lilith in psychological and spiritual astrology. 1. The archetype of the shadow, Carl Jung. Lilith is interpreted as a symbol of the Jungian shadow, the aspects of ourselves that we reject or do not recognize. Working with Lilith in astrology allows people to confront these repressed areas and transform them into empowerment tools. 2. Spirituality and authenticity. On a spiritual level, Lilith invites people to free themselves from social and cultural chains to discover their true self. It is associated with the connection with the divine female and the balance between the masculine and the feminine in the psyche. Lilith in collective astrology. 1. Lilith's role in astrological feminism. In the social context, Lilith symbolizes the struggle for gender equality and the claim of female sexuality. It has been adopted as an astrological emblem of female empowerment, challenging patriarchal structures and celebrating autonomy. 2. Collective cycles. Lilith is also used to analyze cultural and social trends. Its position in the sky can coincide with movements related to the release of the oppressed and the transformation of power structures. Lilith in modern astrology. A living symbol. Lilith in modern astrology is not only a self-knowledge tool, but also a reminder of the transformative power that resides in the hidden and rejected. His energy challenges people to accept their authenticity, embrace their personal power and free their creative potential. Through its influence on the natal letters and their role in collective cycles, Lilith remains a symbol of resistance, autonomy, and female power, a figure that inspires to confront internal shadows and find the light in them. Lilith has experienced a fascinating transformation in the context of contemporary feminism, adopting as a powerful symbol of liberation, autonomy, and rebellion. Throughout history, Lilith was seen as a demonic or marginalized figure, but today, it is used by many as an emblem of resistance against power structures that try to control or suppress women. Contemporary feminism has appropriated Lilith as a symbol of women who refuses to undergo patriarchal expectations. She is the antithesis of the submissive Eva, a figure that has been historically idealized in Judeo-Christian culture as passive woman, the obedient wife. Lilith, on the other hand, is the woman who challenges, the one who says not when she is required to be something that is not, the one who fights for her autonomy and her right to decide on her own body and destiny. Lilith's rebellion, the challenge to the established order. Lilith's rebellion against Adam, his refusal to submit and his decision to leave the Garden of Eden, has become one of the most significant acts in the context of feminism. Instead of being seen as an evil or demonic figure, Lilith is now celebrated as the first woman who refused to accept subordination. Its escape from Eden is a declaration of independence, a break with the established order, a break with patriarchy. For many women in contemporary feminism, Lilith represents the courage to face oppressive social norms. Instead of being punished or rejected, Lilith becomes a heroine, a strong woman who chooses her destiny and defies the traditional expectations of submission. Like Lilith, current women fight for equality, freedom, and respect for their autonomy. Lilith and female sexuality. One of the most powerful aspects of Lilith's symbol is its connection with female sexuality. In traditional stories, Lilith is associated with sexual desire and freedom. In many stories, his departure from Eden is interpreted as an act of rebellion not only against male authority, but also against the norms that regulate female sexuality. Instead of submitting to Adam's rules, which demanded to be a passive and subordinate wife, Lilith chooses his own path, a path that includes his right to enjoy his sexuality without guilt or restrictions. This aspect of Lilith has been adopted by feminism as a symbol of female sexual liberation. In a society that has often repressed the sexual expression of women, Lilith represents a powerful figure that embraces their sexuality without shame, which refuses to be judged by their desires. She is the woman who claims her right to own her body and pleasure, a right that has historically been denied to women. Lilith as a symbol of female empowerment. The figure of Lilith in feminism is not only seen as a symbol of rebellion and sexuality, but also of empowerment. Its history is a reminder that women have the power to make their own decisions, to challenge the system and fight for their autonomy. In a world where women have historically been silenced or limited in their possession, Lilith offers a resistance and strength model. Through the figure of Lilith, many women find a source of inspiration to challenge social, political, and cultural expectations that try to define their place in the world. Lilith symbolizes the freedom to be a woman without fear of judgment, the freedom to be the one who really wants to be, regardless of the norms imposed by society. Lilith's rebirth in popular culture. In recent decades, Lilith has gained increasing popularity in popular culture, especially within feminist movements. From music to literature, through cinema and visual arts, Lilith has been reinterpreted in various ways, always as a symbol of power and challenge. His figure has been rescued from oblivion and has become a cultural icon that represents a strong, brave woman willing to fight for her freedom. Artists, writers, and feminist activists have claimed Lilith as a model of strength and resilience, using it as a symbol of the struggle for gender equality and women's rights. Lilith is the woman who faces oppressive systems, which challenges the norms and embraces her own power, and this image of Lilith has deeply penetrated the collective consciousness of contemporary women. Lilith, an evolving figure. The use of Lilith as a feminist symbol continues to evolve. Since its origin in ancient myths, through its demonization in Christianity and its reinterpretation in the 21st century, Lilith has gone through a transformation process that reflects the changes in the perception of women over time. In its contemporary version, Lilith is no longer seen as a villain or a demonic being, but as an icon of empowerment, independence, and autonomy. In this context, Lilith becomes a symbol of what it means to be a free woman, free of being, free to love and live without restrictions, and free to challenge any system that tries to limit your freedom. For today's feminists, Lilith is a warrior. His image, previously demonized and rejected, has been transformed into a source of inspiration, resonating with modern women who seek to recover their ancestral power, break chains, and embrace their authentic identity. Throughout history, Lilith has been associated with rebellion, autonomy, and sensuality, and it is precisely this transformative energy that has made it a key spiritual symbol in the new era. Instead of being seen as the woman fleeing the patriarchy, Lilith is now understood as the woman who rises, challenges herself, and he claims his right to exist without restrictions, without feeling guilty for his nature or his desires. Spiritual liberation through Lilith. Women who feel trapped by traditional expectations or for the weight of history find in Lilith a guide that drives them to free themselves. In the context of the new era spirituality, Lilith becomes a symbol of empowerment that invites women to challenge established power structures and embrace their own inner strength. It is no longer a figure that flees, but a woman who reconciles with her power and inner wisdom. Lilith represents the energy of the independent woman who does not submit to the social norms imposed, but follows her own path, guided by her intuition and connection with the divine. This interpretation of Lilith as a spiritual figure becomes a resilience model for those who seek to overcome self-imposed or social limitations, and instead, embrace their authenticity. Lilith as protectors of female instinct. In the new era, Lilith has come to be understood as a guardian of the female instinct, a figure that connects women with their ancestral wisdom and with their deepest intuition. At a time when modern society tends to disconnect women from its wildest and most authentic nature, Lilith offers a space to return to the basics: respect for oneself, the acceptance of nature itself, and the connection with the mysteries of life. Lilith is seen as a self-sufficiency model. She is not the submissive wife or the idealized mother figure, she is the woman who owns her destiny, capable of making decisions consciously, without fear of being judged. She symbolizes the power of women to connect with her inner wisdom and trust her intuition, without the interference of the judgment of others. Lilith and sacred sexuality. Within the New Era spirituality, Lilith has also become a symbol of sacred sexuality. Its association with female sexuality has been revalued as a powerful force that is not only a manifestation of pleasure, but also of deep spiritual connection. Instead of being seen as a simple object of desire or as a threat to the established order, Lilith is now understood as a figure that celebrates sexuality as a path to personal lighting. This vision of Lilith highlights the importance of embracing sexuality as a natural expression of being, free of guilt and social restrictions. For modern women, Lilith represents the freedom to express and explore their sexuality authentically, without fear of conviction or judgment. In this context, Lilith becomes a spiritual guide that invites women to heal sexual repression wounds and reconnect with their vital energy and creative strength. Lilith and the connection with the divine female. In the New Era spirituality, Lilith has also been seen as a manifestation of the divine female principle. While many religious and spiritual traditions have relegated the feminine to the background or have associated it with submission, Lilith emerges as a figure that celebrates the divine in its entirety, recognizing that the feminine and masculine are essential parts of the cosmic balance. She is not the woman who seeks the approval of a male figure, but the one who reconciles with her own divinity and is empowered from inside. Through Lilith, modern women find a deeper connection with the divine, a force that is both wild and sacred. This reconnection with the divine female allows women to free themselves from the limiting ideas of what they should be, and empower themselves to be the ones they really are. Lilith offers the possibility of healing the wounds caused by oppression and exclusion of the feminine, and finding peace and balance by embracing all facets of female existence. Lilith's influence on contemporary spiritual practices. Lilith, in the spirituality of the New Era, is more than a symbol or a mythological figure. It has become a living and dynamic force that inspires modern spiritual practices. From meditation to healing rituals, through astrology and tarot, Lilith is convened as a guide that helps women find their voice, heal their traumas and express their personal power. In the practices of the New Era, Lilith is used as an archetype to invoke inner wisdom, free fears, and embrace the transforming power of change. Those who seek their presence in rituals discover that Lilith not only represents rebellion, but also evolution, spiritual transformation, and the ability to reinvent themselves without fear. She is the primary force that feeds the healing process and empowerment, guiding women to a place where they can own their destiny and embrace everything they are. Lilith as a resistance and rebirth model. In a world that still struggles to achieve gender equality and social justice, Lilith has become a resistant symbol for women of the New Era. She represents the courage to challenge the established, to claim what belongs to us and never give up, regardless of adversities. Lilith is the woman who reinvents himself again and again, who rises after each fall, which challenges power structures and redefines what it means to be a woman. In this sense, Lilith has become a model for women who seek to redraw the map of their life, who dare to be rebels and build their own path, guided by self-confidence and the desire to transform the world that surrounds them. The figure of Lilith has been subject to interpretation and revaluation over the centuries, partly due to the complex moral duality that surrounds it. In various traditions, Lilith presents both an angel and a demon, which makes it a fascinating, ambiguous, and deeply enigmatic character. This moral duality reflects the tensions inherent to conceptions about good and evil, femininity, power and submission, and offers a unique opportunity to explore how cultures and religions have played the role of female figures in their relationship with the divine and the dark. Lilith as angel, the divine rebellion. Lilith's first conception, in some traditions, presents it as a fallen angel, but not in the traditional sense of fallen angels like Lucifer. In some Cabalistic and mystical texts, Lilith is seen as a primary figure of creation, often associated with independence, freedom and knowledge. As such, his role is connected to the idea of a heavenly being who refuses to undergo an established order, especially in relation to Adam. In the tradition of Cabal, for example, Lilith is seen as a figure that emanates from the same divine energy as angels, and their rebellion against Adam and God is not so much an act of evil, but of searching for equality and autonomy. By refusing to undergo Adam, Lilith becomes a symbol of the principle of freedom against oppression and control. His rejection of submission could be interpreted as an act of divine rebellion, where, instead of being convicted, he is looking for a deeper understanding of his own nature, and therefore, of the divine. In this way, Lilith is presented as a figure that, although it challenges the rules, does so in the name of self-affirmation and equity. His independence and his will not to undergo patriarchy reflect a vision of women as an autonomous being, which can be considered angelica in the sense that he rejects an unfair order to embrace freedom. Lilith as a demon, the dark seductive on the other hand, Lilith has been traditionally associated with darkness, seduction, and danger, characteristics that link it with the figure of a demon. In biblical narratives and in medieval folklore, Lilith is described as a demon that seduces men, leads them to perdition, and gives birth to malevolent creatures, such as succubes and demons. This representation is deeply rooted in the patriarchal vision of women as chaos and temptation agents. In Ben Sira's Alphabet, a medieval text that gives details about Lilith's myth, is presented to Lilith as a figure that, after his escape from Eden, becomes a demon and mother of many of the demons that torment the humanity. Her role as seductive and her connection with child death, through her suffocation of newborns, make her a symbol of everything she feared in femininity, the destructive power and the danger that can emanate from female sexuality not controlled. In this context, Lilith represents the threat of chaos and transgression to social and religious norms. In this tradition, Lilith is not only a demon that has the power of seduction, but also a dangerous figure, a being that acts against divine and human order. It is seen as a necessary evil that must be fought to preserve order and morals. Here, Lilith's morality is completely inverted, its rejection of established norms and seduction are seen as acts of evil and corruption. Lilith's duality, symbol of freedom and chaos. Lilith's moral duality analysis suggests that his figure transcends the simple categories of angel or demon, since his ambiguity highlights the deep tensions between freedom and control, order and chaos, good and evil. While in some traditions it is seen as a rebel angel who seeks autonomy and equality, in others it is portrayed as a fixed demoniac that endangers morality and established order. Its representation as an angel or demon depends largely on the cultural and religious framework from which it is observed. For some, her struggle for autonomy and her rejection of patriarchy makes her a heroine that defies the oppressive order and assumes a resistance role before an authoritarian power. For others, her role as seductive and demon mother makes her a symbol of the dangers inherent to female transgression and autonomy. A complex and transformative figure in the contemporary context, the figure of Lilith has been reinterpreted and claimed by many people as a symbol of personal power, autonomy, and liberation. In this sense, the ambiguity of its morality remains a central aspect of its attraction. Lilith represents the complexity of women as a figure that cannot be reduced to traditional roles taxes by society. Instead of being seen as pure or impure, angelic or demonic, Lilith is a woman who does not fit expectations and challenges simplistic definitions. In the end, the analysis of Lilith's duality not only reveals the complexity of his character, but also the broader debates about morality, autonomy, and power in religious and cultural traditions. It is a figure that invites you to reflect on what it means to be free, and how transgression, although often seen negatively, can also be a form of growth, renewal, and personal liberation. Lilith, the mythical figure that has captured the imagination of innumerable cultures, is frequently compared to other mythology figures that also represent complex aspects of femininity, rebellion, and transgression. Among these figures are Pandora, of Greek mythology, and Medea, of the Greek tragedies. Although each of them belongs to a different cultural context, they all share issues of disobedience, punishment, and the moral ambiguity that surrounds them. Lilith's comparison with Pandora and Medea allows us to explore how different cultures have addressed the figure of the woman who defies the established norms and dangers that this entails. Lilith and Pandora, temptation and curiosity. Pandora, like Lilith, is a figure linked to transgression, but while Lilith rebels against the patriarchal authority of Adam and God, Pandora does so through her insatiable curiosity. In Greek mythology, Pandora is the first woman created by the gods, who receives a box that should not open. The opening of the box, driven by curiosity, releases all evils about humanity, leaving only hope inside. Both figures, Lilith and Pandora, are presented as the source of great evils for humanity, but in very different contexts. Pandora represents female curiosity and her desire to know, which leads her to open the box that unleashes suffering in the world. This curiosity is seen as dangerous, and therefore, Pandora is punished by the gods. In her myth, she is a figure condemned to be the cause of all the evils that affect humanity, a vision in which the perception of women is reflected as the carrier of perdition due to her desire to know what is forbidden. On the other hand, Lilith is seen as a woman who rejects submission and seeks her independence, challenging Adam's authority. While Pandora succumbs to her curiosity, Lilith acts with a determination that leads her to flee from Eden and reject what is imposed. While Pandora's punishment is based on disobedience to the gods, Lilith's punishment is a consequence of her refusal to undergo Adam's control. Both figures, however, have in common being punished for their transgression, and both become symbols of the dangerous and disobedient woman. Lilith and Medea, the power of revenge and female autonomy in contrast to Pandora, which is a mainly passive figure. Medea, of Greek mythology, shares with Lilith a more active and vindictive position. Medea is a woman who, unlike Pandora, is not limited to being a victim of circumstances, but takes control of her destiny, even if this implies extreme violence. Medea is known for her murder of her own children, an act of revenge against her husband Jason, who had betrayed her. His story is one of love, betrayal and revenge, and, like Lilith, his role is not that of a simple passive figure, but that of a woman who makes drastic decisions to face her suffering. Like Lilith, Medea represents a form of female autonomy that challenges social and moral norms. In his myth, Medea not only rebels against Jason, but against society itself, who rejects her for being a foreigner and a powerful woman. The act of killing his children is, in many feelings the culmination of its despair and its anger towards a system that oppresses and betrays it. While Lilith flees from Eden to find her independence, Medea faces the world and men who have stripped her of her dignity and power. Medea and Lilith share the issue of revenge in response to a betrayal, but also symbolize the strength of women who take control of her life, even at the expense of social and family norms. In both cases, female transgression is linked to unusual violence, and although both characters are vilified by their behavior, they are also seen as power figures, although tragic. Similarities and differences. Despite the differences in the details of the myths of Lilith, Pandora and Medea, there are several points of convergence in the way these figures are represented. First, all of them are connected to the notion of transgression. While Pandora disobeys the gods when opening the box, Lilith challenges Adam and God by refusing to submit, and Medea transcends the limits of morality accepted by their revenge. These figures share the theme of a woman who departs from the norm and faces the consequences of her actions. However, while Pandora is a figure punished for her curiosity and lack of self-control, Lilith and Medea are women who seek autonomy, although through drastic means. Lilith flees in search of independence, while Medea acts with a fierce determination to take revenge on the men who have betrayed her. Both, therefore, present a version of femininity that goes beyond traditional submission. They are women who make radical decisions to affirm their power and autonomy. The symbolism of rebel woman. The figure of Lilith, like Pandora and Medea, has been interpreted in multiple ways over the centuries. While in some contexts they are seen as warnings about the danger of female disobedience, in others they are celebrated as symbols of power and resistance. Lilith's rebellion, Pandora's desire for knowledge, and Medea's revenge reflect different facets of the woman who defies the norms, and each of these figures, in her own context, offers a reflection on the role of women in society, power, and personal autonomy. The comparison between Lilith, Pandora, and Medea not only reveals the myths of female transgression, but also shows how cultures have dealt with fear and fascination towards women who do not submit, the woman who, like these figures, cross the established limits and redefine what it means to be a woman in their society. Lilith, the figure that has endured over the centuries, is an enigma both in the mythological and historical plane. The question of whether Lilith is an invented myth or a figure based on real events has been discussed for centuries, and its existence and historical legitimacy remain complex and fascinating issues. To understand the nature of Lilith, it is necessary to explore its origins in ancient cultures, its evolution in religious traditions, and its transformation into popular narrative. Mesopotamian roots, an older origin than the Bible. The figure of Lilith did not arise from nothing, nor was it a modern invention. Its deepest roots are found in the ancient Mesopotamian cultures, long before Christianity or Judaism emerged as dominant religions. In Sumerian and Babylonian texts, Lilith is associated with demons or night spirits. It is believed that his name comes from the word Lilitu, which refers to female demons that lurk during the night, especially those who attack pregnant women or newborns. This initial figure of Lilith, in its darkest version, was not a unique entity, but a category of demons that shared similar characteristics, malignant beings that stalked in the dark. It is in the Sumerian and Babylonian legends where we find Lilith in its most archetypal form. It is often described as a dangerous being, associated with night and death. These Lilith representations were adapted and transformed as the surrounding cultures adopted and reinterpreted their characteristics. Lilith's transition from a night demon to a more central figure in Judeo-Christian traditions began to form slowly, but the foundations of its existence as a mythological being can be traced to these ancient cultures. Lilith's myth in Jewish tradition, inclusion in sacred texts. The Jewish tradition, particularly in the apocryphal texts and in the alphabet of Ben Sira of the 7th century AD, begins to give Lilith a more defined way as an autonomous, independent and rebel figure. In Ben Sira's alphabet story, Lilith is presented as the first Hankafse of Adam, created equal to him in the Garden of Eden. This representation of Lilith, as a woman who refuses to undergo Adam and patriarchal standards, marks an important change in the narrative. Throughout history, Lilith has been seen as the incarnation of female independence, a figure that questions the subordination of women to men and fights for their freedom. However, although Lilith appears in these texts, his figure was never included in the official Hebrew Bible. The history of his rebellion against Adam and his subsequent escape from Eden is considered more a legend than a part of the canonical narrative. Some scholars suggest that Lilith's myth could have been deliberately supplanted or eliminated by religious authorities throughout the centuries, in an effort to quell the representations of independent and powerful women who did not adjust to the traditional vision of women in society. Lilith's myth and history, a real figure? It is important to consider whether Lilith can be a historical figure, and although some researchers argue that their origins could be based on real historical figures, most academics agree that Lilith, as we know it, is a mythical figure more than a historical character. Lilith's myth reflects, in fact, the anxieties and tensions of ancient cultures about female power and autonomy, but there seems to be no historical evidence that suggests that Lilith was a real person. On the other hand, the importance of Lilith in the history of religions and mythologies is found in its symbolism. While there is no evidence that Lilith has existed as a historical figure, its cultural impact has been significant. Throughout the centuries, it has served as a means to explore conflicts between social order and individual freedom, patriarchy and female resistance. His myth has worked as a reflection of the fears and desires of the societies that adopted it, adapting his figure according to his own values and concerns. Lilith's historical legitimacy, a matter of interpretation. The debate on Lilith's historical legitimacy is based on the distinction between historical events and cultural symbolism. Lilith's figure is not necessarily an invented myth, but rather a cultural and religious construction that evolved over the centuries. Its origin in Mesopotamian mythology, its adaptation in Judeo-Christian texts and their reappearance in contemporary literature and art show that, more than a real being, Lilith is a powerful symbol of rebellion, independence and the complexity of femininity. Throughout history, Lilith has been interpreted in many ways, as a seductive demon, as a demon mother, as an empowered figure, and as an archetype of the woman who challenges the authority and the established norms. His presence in mythology and popular culture is proof of the enduring influence of his stories and his ability to inspire both fear and admiration. The myth of Lilith, from its first mentions in ancient Mesopotamia to its reproductions in modern popular culture, has had a transforming power that has transcended the borders of religions and civilizations. Lilith has not only been a character that lives in sacred texts or stories of ancient mythologies, but has become a symbol that has deeply influenced the way cultures understand power, autonomy, and fight against authority structures. From its oldest roots, Lilith has been an archetype that represents rebellion, independence, and darkness, challenging both social and divine norms. Through the centuries, his myth has been reinterpreted and reconfigured, adapting to the concerns and values of different cultures, but always maintaining an essence of strength and resistance that continues to touch those who cross with him. Lilith's transformation throughout the ages. Lilith was born, like many mythical figures, in the shadow of the first religious beliefs of ancient civilizations. In Mesopotamian cultures, it was a night entity associated with death, disease, and darkness. But, as we advance in history, its figure is transformed, moving from a terrifying demon to a more complex figure with a symbolic burden that would be interpreted in many ways at different times. In the ancient Sumerian and Babylonian cultures, a role as a demon or evil spirit that stalked women during childbirth or young children was attributed. This primitive Lilith did not have the power that it would acquire in other traditions, but was more seen as a threat than an active agent of change. However, with the appearance of Lilith in the alphabet or Ben Sira within the Jewish tradition, his figure begins to transform. In this version, Lilith is presented as Adam's first wife, created equal to him, but banished from Eden due to her refusal to submit to her partner. This Lilith rebellion against Adam and, by extension, against the same divine order, marks the beginning of its evolution as a symbol of independence, resistance, and empowerment. It is in this representation where Lilith begins to acquire a new power, not only as a demon, but as a figure that defies the patriarchal order. Lilith's influence grows in other cultures, and his figure is appropriate in different ways. As Christianity imposes itself as the dominant religion, Lilith is systematically rejected by official teachings, but infiltrates popular legends, especially through stories that link it with the figure of the witch and the dangerous seductive. In the Middle Ages, the image of Lilith as a woman who defies social and religious norms resonates strongly in the iconography of evil and sin, but also begins to be subversive as a symbol of female freedom. Lilith and the power of rebellion. Lilith's myth has had considerable power because it touches a universal theme, the struggle for autonomy and self-determination. In a historical context in which women were subject to the social and religious norms of their time, Lilith emerges as a figure that openly challenges that submission. His rebellion against Adam, by refusing to bed under him during the sexual act, can be seen as a radical criticism of patriarchal control over female sexuality. Instead of simply being a demonic figure, Lilith is seen by many feminist currents as a representation of female power against oppression. Over the centuries, Lilith's myth has served as a means to express the wishes and frustrations of women who have felt oppressed or limited by patriarchal social structures. In this sense, Lilith is not only a mythical figure, but a symbol of resistance against forces that seek to control individual freedom, especially the sexual and emotional freedom of women. Through its autonomy, Lilith becomes an emblem of the struggle for rights and self-determination. Lilith and sexuality, the power of desire. Another fundamental aspect of Lilith's myth is its relationship with sexuality. In many cultures, Lilith has been seen as the personification of prohibited desires and pleasures, a figure that represents the transgression of the sexual norms imposed by society. Her ability to seduce Adam and then her link with Samhael, the angel of death, makes her a powerful character who controls the fate of those who fall under her influence. Sexuality in Lilith's myth is complex and loaded with meanings. While in some stories Lilith is demonized as a dangerous seductive, in others she is seen as a woman who claims her right to sexual autonomy. Lilith's connection with the succubes, female demons that seduce and have relations with men in the dark, reinforces this idea of sexuality as a dangerous force, but also as a means of power. Lilith is seen, in many ways, as a woman who takes control of her own body and desire, challenging the restrictions imposed by religions and social norms. Lilith's rebirth in modernity. Lilith's myth has experienced resurgence in modern times, especially in recent decades, as a symbol of power, resistance, and feminism. In a world where women continue to fight for their rights and for equality, Lilith has become an emblematic figure of female autonomy. His image as a mother of demons or as a dangerous seductive has been reinterpreted in the contemporary context to represent the ability of women to take control of their life and destiny. The power of the Lilith myth lies in its flexibility and its ability to adapt to times. While in the past it was demonized and used as a warning for women who deviate from the norm, at present, Lilith has been rehabilitated as a symbol of empowerment. Through popular culture, literature, music, and art, Lilith continues to challenge the established norms and claim her place as a power figure, not only as a demon, but as a woman who refuses to be silenced. A myth that persists in time. Lilith has transcended the borders of myth and legend. It is not only a character of the past, but a living figure that continues to impact and resonate with contemporary cultures. his power as a symbol of the fight against oppression and the search for freedom remains relevant and in the day, and its history continues to be a source of inspiration for those who challenge the norms and seek to affirm their autonomy. Lilith's myth, far from being a simple old story, remains a powerful tool to understand the complexities of power, rebellion, and freedom, issues that remain essential in our current society. Ultimately, Lilith is a figure that exists in collective imagination, rather than in verifiable historical events. Its historical legitimacy is not found in its existence as a real person, but on its impact as a myth that has persisted over time. Whether like a night demon, a rebel woman, or a female empowerment figure, Lilith remains one of the most fascinating figures of world mythology, a will in the way in which cultures have tried to make sense of the mysteries of power, sex, and autonomy. Lilith's myth, with its symbolic and narrative wealth, offers deep lessons on universal issues such as equality, power, and freedom. Over the centuries, his figure has been the subject of multiple interpretations, each reflecting the social and cultural concerns of his time. However, when examining it more carefully, timeless lessons can be extracted that remain relevant today, especially in the context of contemporary struggles for human rights, personal autonomy, and gender equality. One of the most powerful lessons of Lilith's myth is the struggle for equality. Since his first appearance as Adam's first wife, Lilith is described as a woman created from the same land as him, which implies a fundamental equality between them. However, his rejection of undergoing Adam reflects a radical interpretation of equality. Lilith does not accept to be treated as inferior or subordinate, even when the established order demands it. His departure from Eden, far from being a defeat, becomes an act of personal affirmation and dignity. In many cultures, the figure of Lilith has been used as a symbol of resistance to hierarchies and structures that perpetuate inequality, especially in terms of gender. By disobeying the idea of submission that is imposed, Lilith embodies the struggle for equity in a world where women have often been seen as subordinate to men. His myth suggests that equality should not be negotiated or limited by the control or oppression of those who hold power. Lilith's myth also highlights the importance of personal autonomy. From his refusal to undergo Adam, Lilith demonstrates a deep desire to control her life and destiny. His rejection of being governed or dominated by another human being is an act of affirmation of personal power, something that is often associated with independence and self-determination. Lilith does not conform to the limits imposed by society or by the authority figures, but, by deciding its own path, redefines its existence outside the margins of the domain of others. This act of autonomy is a reminder that personal power lies in the ability to make decisions about oneself, even if those decisions challenge established expectations or norms. At present, Lilith remains an emblem of power for many people, especially for women fighting for claiming their autonomy in a world where their rights and desires are often minimized or ignored. Your figure invites you to question the expectations imposed and to claim the right to decide on our own lives. The theme of rebellion is deeply rooted in Lilith's myth. His rejection to submit to Adam and his subsequent escape from Eden symbolize an act of freedom, the freedom to act according to their own principles, without yielding to the pressures or expectations of others. This act of rebellion not only defies the patriarchal family structure, but also faces the very concept of blind authority and obedience. Lilith's myth teaches that true freedom is not simply the absence of external restrictions, but the ability to make decisions and act in accordance with what one believes is fair or correct. Through his rebellion, Lilith becomes a model of struggle for freedom against social, political, and religious restrictions. Today, Lilith's rebellion can be interpreted as a reminder that freedom is not a given state, but a constant conquest. The struggle for freedom continues to be essential, especially in a world where systems of oppression continue to limit the options of millions of people. Like Lilith, who fight for their freedom must be willing to challenge structures that seek to keep the status quo. Another relevant aspect of Lilith's myth is its relationship with sexuality. In many versions of myth, Lilith is linked to sensuality, challenging sexuality and sexual freedom. Its connection with the succubes and their seduction power reflect a vision of female sexuality as a powerful, autonomous and, in many cases, dangerous force for those who try to control it. Lilith offers an important lesson on the acceptance of sexuality itself as a natural component and empowerment of identity. His story defies the idea that women must be submissive or moderate in their sexual desires, and their figure has become a symbol of female empowerment in terms of control and expression of sexuality. Instead of being a being that must be dominated or repressed, Lilith represents women's ability to claim their sexuality freely and not restrictive. Finally, Lilith offers a reflection on the importance of challenging the established order when this is unfair. By rejecting the patriarchal hierarchy that places it in a subordinate role, Lilith becomes a figure that represents resistance against systems that seek to maintain oppressive power structures. His refusal to follow the rules imposed is not only a matter of personal independence, but also a direct challenge to the norms that perpetuate inequality. Lilith's story is a call to question social, religious, and cultural norms that often oppress people and limit their ability to live according to their own desires and values. His rebel attitude is a reminder that, sometimes, it is necessary to challenge the norms and seek his own path to find freedom and justice. Lilith and the future of myth. The myth of Lilith, a figure that has transcended the borders of time, religion, and cultures, continues to evolve and adopt new forms. Over the centuries, it has been reinterpreted and adapted according to social, cultural, and spiritual changes. However, it is likely that its history continues to transform and grow, with a particular approach to contemporary struggles for equality, personal autonomy, and justice. As society continues to face challenges related to power, oppression, and liberation, Lilith will probably remain a central figure of resistance, rebellion, and empowerment. Lilith's future as a feminist icon seems promising. As the struggles for gender equality, women's empowerment, and self-determination continue throughout the world, Lilith can continue to be seen as a symbol of women's ability to claim their place in the world, without yielding social or patriarchal pressures. In an increasingly oriented future for gender equity and the struggle for human rights, Lilith could evolve to become an emblem of personal and collective liberation, highlighting the importance that women take possession of their own voice, body, and destination. His figure could continue to be a source of inspiration for new generations, especially in the context of movements such as intersectional feminism, which addresses complex oppression issues related to gender, social class, race, and sexual identity. Lilith represents the possibility of subverting traditional power structures, and its history could continue to influence the struggle for social justice. As popular culture continues to transform with technological innovations, social media platforms, and globalized narratives, Lilith's myth will probably continue to be reinterpreted in various formats. As cinema, television, literature, and visual arts continue to explore issues of power, rebellion, and moral duality, Lilith can evolve as a complex, multidimensional, and even more relevant character for contemporary challenges. It is possible that, in the future, Lilith's story is not only used to explore gender issues, but also enter into issues of ethics, justice, and the fight against oppressive systems. Lilith's figure could find a new role in stories that challenge the traditional paradigms of heroism, subverting expectations when presenting Lilith as a figure whose rejection of the established norms does not make it a villain, but a complex heroine whose rebellion is a way to seek justice. With the growing importance of digital media and transmedia narratives, Lilith is likely to be reinterpreted in new interactive forms, such as video games, comics, and online entertainment platforms, allowing audiences to connect more personally with their history. In a world in which traditional religions are giving way to new forms of spirituality, Lilith can adopt an even more prominent role as a spiritual guide, especially within the feminist, neo-paganist, and New Era communities. Already at present, Lilith has been seen as a symbol of spiritual freedom and the connection with the divine from a non-hierarchical and non-submissive perspective. In the future, Lilith could continue to be a key figure for those looking for a spirituality that empowers women, while challenging traditional dogmatic structures. In many modern interpretations, Lilith is seen as an archetype of spiritual autonomy, a figure that teaches women to claim their internal power, to strip the restrictions imposed, and to live according to their spiritual truth. As such, Lilith's myth could continue to evolve in spiritual and personal development circles, where the balance between chaos and order, autonomy and connection with the divine is explored. Sexuality, a central theme in the myth of Lilith, will continue to be a fundamental aspect of its symbolism in the future. As discussions about sexuality become more inclusive, fluid and open, Lilith can continue to be a figure that defies the traditional notions of female sexuality. In a world where the norms on sexual identity, consent, and sexual freedom are constantly reviewed, Lilith can symbolize a form of female eroticism and desire that is free of guilt, control, and repression. With the growth of acceptance of sexual and gender diversity, Lilith can evolve to represent not only seduction and sexual power, but also a figure that embraces the plurality and complexity of human sexual experience, challenging the idea of the sexuality as something that must be regulated or controlled by social and cultural norms. Lilith, as a symbol of resistance and fighting external control, can also adopt a dimension in the social and environmental movements of the future. His rebellion against power structures could resonate in those who fight for environmental justice, human rights, and global equity. Lilith can become an icon for those who defend the right to autonomy, not only in personal terms, but also in relation to land rights, nature, and marginalized communities. As global social movements demand structural changes in economic and ecological policies, Lilith can be seen as a metaphor of the need to rebel against destructive structures that perpetuate exploitation and oppression, both at human and environmental level. Lilith's myth will continue to evolve and take new forms as societies face the challenges of the future. Throughout the centuries, Lilith has been a symbol of resistance, autonomy, power, and sexuality, and these issues will continue to be relevant in discussions on human rights, gender equity, spirituality, and social justice. As a figure that defies the rules and expectations imposed, Lilith will be a constant presence in the stories that explore the struggle for freedom and empowerment, reminding us that Lilith's myth is as dynamic and multifaceted as the people who are inspired by him. Lilith's myth remains a powerful figure of empowerment, resistance, and challenge against power structures. Through its history, Lilith teaches us that the search for equality, personal autonomy, and freedom are fundamental rights that should not be negotiated. His rebellion before submission, his control over his own sexuality, and his resistance to the patriarchal order make Lilith a timeless figure that continues to inspire those who fight for justice and freedom in the modern world. The figure of Lilith has deeply influenced modern literature and art, being reinterpreted over the years in various forms. His image as a powerful, rebel, and emancipated woman has resonated with feminist movements, the concerns about identity and autonomy, and the exploration of female sexuality. Next, there are some outstanding examples of their influence on contemporary literature and art. The Red Tent by Anita Diamond, 1997. Although Lilith is not a central character in The Red Tent, a novel that reinterprets the biblical story of Dinah, Jacob's daughter, Lilith's figure is evoked through the exploration of women in the Bible and the representation of the figure's female that challenge traditional regulations. Lilith, as a symbol of rebellion and female empowerment, is presented in the novel as an implicit reference to women who do not submit to the patriarchal expectations of their time. This work highlights the importance of women who take the control of your destiny and challenge oppression, an issue that can be related to the mythological figure of Lilith. Lilith's Brood by Octavia Butler, 1987. In this science fiction trilogy, the writer Octavia Butler plays with the figure of Lilith when using the name of the demonic appears as part of a plot in which humans are invaded and transformed by an alien species. In this context, Lilith becomes a leadership and resistance figure against oppressors, which offers a modern vision of its transformation and autonomy power. In Lilith's Brood, the protagonist, Lilith Iyapo, faces the creation of a new humanity under the circumstances of submission and radical change, and becomes a crucial character for the survival of humanity. The Bloody Chamber by Angela Carter, 1979. Angela Carter, known for her review of traditional fairy tales, takes the figure of Lilith as a symbol in some of her stories, where women take control of their lives in a bold and challenging way. In his collection The Bloody Chamber, Carter explores issues of sexuality, power, and the relationship between women and monstrosity. Lilith, in this context, can be reflected in the character of their heroines, who rebel against submission expectations and take possession of their inner power, as seen in the story The Tiger's Bride. Lilith by George MacDonald, 1895. George MacDonald Lilith's novel is an early example of the modern representation of Lilith's figure, although his approach is more allegorical than historical. In this book, Lilith presents itself as a gloomy figure that embodies death and redemption. History explores the issues of the struggle between good and evil, life after death, and transformation of the soul, placing Lilith as a figure capable of causing suffering but also to offer the opportunity of a new life through understanding and sacrifice. Lilith by John Collier, 1892. One of Lilith's best-known representations in modern painting is John Collier's Lilith work, a portrait that presents her as a seductive woman, with a snake curled on her arm. The painting reflects the representation of Lilith as a dangerous woman, associated with original sin and temptation. However, in this portrait, you can also see elements of power and autonomy, as if Lilith were aware of its ability to influence the world and its inhabitants. This image of Lilith as a woman with control over her own destiny has been very influential in the modern interpretation of myth. Lilith by Dante Gabriel Rossetti, 1868. The painter Pre-Raphaelite Dante Gabriel Rossetti created a series of works that include Lilith, including a portrait titled simply Lilith. In this work, Lilith's figure is sensual and dangerous, evoking her role as the seductive par excellence. However, Rossetti represents her in a way that underlines her beauty and the power that emanates from her. The painting illustrates how Lilith becomes a symbol of female freedom, rejecting submission expectations to embrace its independence and desire. Lilith by Hugo Simberg, 1896. Finnish painter Hugo Simberg, in his work Lilith, 1896, represents it as a gloomy figure that holds a flower, while facing death. Simberg uses this work to evoke Lilith's moral ambiguity, suggesting that, although it is a figure of rebellion, it is also an entity related to the hidden and unknown. This representation highlights Lilith's ability to symbolize both danger and regeneration, a recurring theme in modern art. Lilith in the music of Sue and the Banshees. The British band Sue and the Banshees incorporated the figure of Lilith into her 1978 album The Scream. The music of Sue, often associated with the Gothic and the dark, reflects the fascination by powerful female figures like Lilith. The band letters not only present Lilith as a mysterious and demonic figure, but also as a symbol of empowerment and fight against oppression. Lilith in the music of Tori Amos. The singer and songwriter Tori Amos has talked openly about how the figure of Lilith has influenced her work, especially in her issues related to female independence and the fight against oppression. In songs like God and Crucify, Amos evokes issues of rebellion against authoritarian figures, a central theme of the Lilith myth. Lilith in The Chilling Adventures of Sabrina. In the Netflix series The Chilling Adventures of Sabrina, Lilith is a key character, played as a manipulative and powerful figure that challenges the established forces. The series presents Lilith as a figure that has historically been stripped of his power, but fights to claim his place and his karnomia. This modern interpretation of Lilith highlights the continuous relevance of her image as a woman who defies the expectations of society and takes the reins of her destiny. Lilith's influence on modern literature and art is extensive and continues to evolve. From cinema to music, through painting and literature, Lilith remains a central figure in the narratives that explore female autonomy, rebellion against patriarchy, and the exploration of sexuality. As gender, power, and control issues continue to be relevant in contemporary society, Lilith is likely to remain a powerful symbolic figure that inspires those who seek to challenge the rules and affirm their right to be and act for themselves. Lilith has endured throughout history as a multifaceted figure, whose impact has transcended ancient mythologies and has resonated deeply in modern culture. From its origins in the Mesopotamian and Jewish traditions to its reinterpretation in art, literature, and contemporary music, Lilith has maintained as a symbol of independence, rebellion, and feminine power. Its history, although wrapped in contradictions and transformations, has captured the collective imagination as the figure of the woman who defies the established norms and seeks autonomy in a world that often represses it. In ancient mythology, Lilith presents itself as a figure that defies its role in Eden, rejecting the submission imposed by Adam and, instead of being a victim of patriarchy, becomes an emblem of personal freedom and the fight for the equality. Its history of being replaced by Eva in the biblical tradition underlines the conflict between order and chaos, independence and submission, issues that remain of great relevance in discussions about the role of women in society. In mystical Judaism, particularly in the Kabbalah, Lilith acquires an even more complex dimension, linking it with evil, desire and sensuality, but also with empowerment and self-transformation capacity. His relationship with figures such as Samuel, the angel of death, places it as a being that, although associated with darkness, also has immense power and a capacity for redemption, which gives him a moral duality that has fascinated generations. Throughout history, Lilith has evolved in the collective imaginary, from being considered a seductive demonic to becoming a feminist icon and a resistance symbol. Literature, as in the works of George MacDonald and Octavia Butler, and art, as in the paintings of John Collier and Dante Gabriel Rossetti, have adopted their figure to explore issues of power, rebellion, sensuality, and female liberation. Lilith has become a character that represents the ability to challenge the rules imposed and take control of his destiny, a message that resonates particularly with contemporary feminist movements. In modern popular culture, Lilith remains a symbol of the woman who refuses to be submissive. His presence in films, television, music, and art series has transformed his figure into an emblem of empowerment and liberation. In works such as The Chilling Adventures of Sabrina and songs by artists such as Tori Amos, Lilith is presented as a force capable of questioning and overcoming the limitations imposed by the patriarchal society. In summary, Lilith is the eternal rebel, a figure whose meaning and legacy have transcended the barriers of time and culture. Its ability to reinvent itself, its struggle for autonomy and equality, and its role as a symbol of power and freedom continue to inspire generations. Lilith not only represents a mythological or historical figure, but also a psychological archetype that reflects the complexity and potential of women in the search for their own identity and power. Lilith's story is still relevant, offering lessons about resistance, self-employment, and the importance of challenging oppressive structures that limit human growth.